Move them to the table by the restroom, Mayor Harold Whitaker said, pointing at the black family near the window. I don't eat dinner beside people like that. At the table near the front window, Maya Williams slowly lifted her eyes from the menu. She did not rise. She only looked at Mayor Harold Whitaker with a calmness so complete. Are you talking about us? She asked. Whitaker's eyes hardened. Since when did this restaurant lower its standards enough to let just anyone sit in my place? Thomas Hale, the restaurant manager, hurried toward them. He was thin, pale, and sweating already. Mayor Whitaker, Thomas said, forcing a smile. Good evening, sir. We have your party ready just over here. Whitaker did not look at the table Thomas indicated. His eyes stayed on Maya's table near the window. That's my table. Thomas swallowed. Yes, sir, normally it is. But that table was reserved earlier this afternoon. Whitaker turned his head slow to. Reserved, he repeated. Yes, sir. By them? Whitaker's mouth tightened. Thomas, I don't come here every Friday night to be seated in the middle of the room like a tourist from Macon. I asked for my table. Clay Dobbs chuckled. Mayor likes to see his town while he eats. Whitaker smiled without warmth. And I don't like my town looking confused. That was when he pointed. Maya set the menu down with quiet care. Her voice came out clear, steady, and precise. The kind of voice that did not need volume to command attention. The restaurant system confirmed our reservation, she said. And under civil rights law and basic service policy, we have every right to remain seated here until our meal is finished. Civil rights law? Service policy? Whitaker let out a sharp laugh, the sound bouncing off the polished marble walls with an ugly edge. He stepped closer and struck the tip of his cane hard against the glossy tile floor, so close to Maya's chair that Daniel's shoulders tightened beside her. In this town, Whitaker said, my law comes first. He leaned on the cane with both hands, bending forward until the gold pin on his red tie caught the warm light from the chandelier. You're from somewhere else, aren't you? That explains it. You don't know the rules around here, do you, sweetheart? Maya did not flinch. Whitaker's mouth curved. Look at you, he said, his gaze dragging over their table, over Maya's simple navy dress, Daniel's plain brown jacket, and Ruth's modest blouse. Cheap clothes, cheap manners. Let me guess. Maybe the taxpayers are paying for this dinner too. People like you always want access to things you didn't earn. He lowered his voice, but not enough to hide the cruelty in it. Colored folks in this town used to understand where they belonged. You should remember that before you bring the smell of poverty into my VIP table. This seat is for people with class, blood, and position, not for strangers who wander in and pretend they're equal. Under the table, Daniel Brooks, Maya's supposed husband, clenched his fist so tightly the knuckles cracked. His jaw flexed once. Beside Maya, Ruth Coleman, playing Maya's younger sister for the night, narrowed her eyes, her expression still controlled, but no longer soft. Maya touched Daniel's knee once beneath the table. Not now, Mr. Mayor. The trembling voice came from near the service station. Sarah Monroe stood there holding a tray of water glasses. They really did reserve that table, Sarah said, taking one small step closer. And they've been nothing but polite. We don't have any restaurant policy that allows discrimination against customers based on. Shut your mouth, Thomas Hale barked. The suddenness of it startled half the room. Thomas rushed to Sarah and shoved her back behind him with more force than he seemed to intend. The water in her glasses trembled. One drop spilled onto the tray. Thomas turned toward Whitaker, his face white with panic. Mayor, please don't be upset, he said quickly. She's new. She doesn't understand how things work here. Please don't hold it against the restaurant. Sarah lowered her eyes, humiliated, but Maya saw the girl's hands still shaking with anger. Thomas approached Maya's table as if walking toward a hospital bed with bad news. Ma'am, he said softly, I am terribly sorry, but there seems to be a small issue with the seating. Maya looked up at him. Her voice was gentle. Was there a problem with our reservation? Thomas opened his mouth, closed it, and glanced back at Whitaker. That glance said more than any confession could. No, ma'am, he said. Not exactly. Daniel leaned back slightly. Then, what exactly is the issue? Thomas rubbed his thumb against the edge of his order pad. The mayor usually sits here. It's just a matter of local custom. We have another table prepared for you. Ruth turned her head toward the back of the room. Near the hallway to the restrooms was a smaller table, half in shadow. I see, Ruth said. Thomas lowered his voice. Please understand, I don't want any trouble tonight. Daniel said. We didn't cause any trouble. I know, Thomas whispered. Across the room, Whitaker grew impatient. Thomas, I hope you're not negotiating. Maya looked at Daniel first. His eyes burned, but he understood the mission. Then she looked at Ruth, who gave the smallest nod. Maya picked up her napkin and placed it beside her plate. Of course, she said. We don't want to cause trouble. Whitaker's smile widened. Sarah hurried over to help move their glasses and plates. Her hands trembled as she lifted the basket of cornbread. I'm sorry, she breathed, so quietly only Maya could hear. It's all right, Maya said, her voice calm and clear. She stood, smoothing the front of her cardigan with quiet dignity. Then she turned to Sarah, whose eyes had gone glassy with anger and humiliation. Thank you for speaking up for us, Maya said gently. Help us move the food to the table by the restroom, please. It's tucked away back there. It seems quieter for conversation. Whitaker lifted his chin and let out a loud, victorious laugh. That's more like it, he said. Know your place, and you might live longer in this town. You hear me? Then Mayor Whitaker lowered himself into the soft leather chair he had just taken, calling for the most expensive bourbon and the finest steak on the menu. Maya walked past Whitaker with Daniel and Ruth beside her. Whitaker leaned slightly toward Clay, speaking loud enough to be heard. See? They always move when they remember where they are. A few men at his table laughed. Maya did not turn around. At the table near the restroom, the overhead light buzzed faintly. The smell of bleach drifted from the hallway. A server pushed through the kitchen door, and hot air rolled over them. Daniel sat down slowly. Tell me we're not letting that stand. Maya unfolded her napkin and placed it in her lap. We're letting him talk. Ruth adjusted her glasses. A proud man will hide from a judge, but he'll brag in front of someone he thinks can't hurt him. Maya reached for her purse and set it carefully by her feet. Inside, beneath a compact mirror, a folded church bulletin, and a pack of peppermint gum, a small recording device waited in silence. Her thumb found the switch. A tiny red light blinked once. The table beside the restroom entrance hid Maya's family from the grandest part of the Magnolia Room. But what Harold Whitaker saw as humiliation, Maya recognized as an advantage. From that corner, they could watch without being watched too closely. Daniel set his glass down hard enough that the ice jumped. Damn it, he muttered. His teeth clenched so tightly the words came out rough. If this weren't a federal operation, I'd stitch that filthy mouth shut myself. Boss, why are we taking this from that pig? Calm down, Daniel, Maya said. She took a napkin and wiped a small splash of water from the tabletop as if nothing in the world had unsettled her. Her hand was steady. Her eyes remained lowered. The most dangerous enemy isn't always the strongest one, she continued. It's the one most convinced he can't be touched. Whitaker's arrogance is the shovel he's using to dig his own grave. Ruth reached for the basket of cornbread Sarah had placed near them. Both of you breathe. He thinks he won. Let him enjoy it. Ruth broke a piece of cornbread in half, then casually touched the button on her jacket. The hidden recorder has filtered out the background noise, Ruth murmured. Audio from Mayor Whitaker's VIP table is coming through clean on my receiver. Let's see who the king of this little kingdom is entertaining tonight. A second later, Whitaker's loud laugh crackled through the tiny earpiece hidden in Maya's ear. It was close, ugly, and full of itself. Another man's voice followed, older and cautious. Mayor Whitaker, the land seizures in the Southside neighborhood. Everything's still under control. Those colored folks down there are making noise. They're threatening to send complaints to the federal level. Federal level? Whitaker gave a dry, contemptuous laugh. Those poor fools couldn't get a complaint past the Red Creek post office, old friend. Sheriff Maddox already collected every form they tried to send. Maya's hand paused for less than a heartbeat before she folded the napkin and placed it beside her plate. Daniel looked at her. She did not look back. She only said, barely moving her lips, "There it is." Ruth's eyes sharpened behind her glasses. Obstruction. Civil rights complaints. Possible male interference if he means what he says. He means it, Daniel said. Across the room, Whitaker tapped his glass with one finger. Thomas, tell the kitchen I want the ribeye, not that thin cut they tried to pass off last month. And bring the pappy if you still have any left. Yes, sir, Thomas said quickly. Clay Dobbs leaned in. We celebrating Monday early, Mayor? Whitaker's smile sharpened. No harm in enjoying the future before it arrives. Maya lowered her menu a fraction. Sheriff Maddox chuckled. Counsel still lined up? Counsel lines up where I tell it to, Whitaker said. Always has. Vernon Pike's voice came lower. And Carter Street? At that name, Ruth's hand stilled above the cornbread. Whitaker took a slow sip of bourbon before answering. Carter Street is tired, Vernon. Old houses, old complaints, old people thinking memories are deeds. By spring, that whole block will be useful again. Clay laughed. Useful means profitable. Same thing when the right people are in charge, Whitaker said. Then Sarah returned with their plates. Thank you, Sarah, Maya said. The girl paused at the sound of her name. Yes, ma'am. Maya looked up at her. Kind but direct. You did a brave thing earlier. Sarah's face tightened. It didn't help. It helped me know who you are. She looked down at her tray. People who help in this town don't always keep their jobs. Ruth spoke gently. Sometimes not helping costs more. Sarah swallowed. For a moment, she seemed about to say something. Then Thomas snapped his fingers from across the room, and she flinched. I have to go, she whispered. As Sarah walked away, Daniel cut into his catfish without eating it. She knows something. They all know something, Maya said. The question is who's tired enough of fear to say it out loud. Ruth glanced toward the window table. Fear gets old, baby. Sooner or later, it needs a chair. At the mayor's table, Thomas arrived with the expensive bottle. Whitaker inspected the label, nodded like a judge approving a sentence, then waved him away. Clay Dobbs pulled a folded paper from inside his jacket and slid it under his bread plate. It was not subtle. It did not need to be. In Red Creek, secrecy had grown lazy because consequence had been absent for so long. Maya watched the movement. Daniel saw it too. Envelope? Document, Maya murmured. Maybe a map. Ruth lifted her fork. Let him get comfortable. Whitaker leaned toward Clay. The vote goes through Monday. By Tuesday, notices go out. By Friday, those holdouts on Carter Street will understand the difference between owning property and standing in the way of progress. Sheriff Maddox wiped his mouth with a napkin. Lillian Harris? Still refusing? Whitaker's voice cooled. Old woman thinks a porch and a photo album make her brave. Maddox smiled. I can make another visit. No, Whitaker said. Not yet. Let the paperwork scare her first. Then you show up. Maya felt Daniel's leg shift beside hers. Under the table, she pressed her heel lightly against his shoe. Not now. The words from Whitaker's table settled into her like stones. Lillian Harris, Carter Street. Notices. Visits from the sheriff. This was no longer rumor wrapped in community gossip. It was a pattern with names. Maya picked up her glass and took a small sip of iced tea. It was sweet enough to ache in her teeth. Half an hour later, the mayor's dinner began to break apart. Whitaker stood first. Two assistants moved ahead of him, clearing the path toward the entrance. Maya kept her eyes on her plate. The recorder was still running. The directional mic had captured Whitaker's remarks about Carter Street, Maddox's role, the council vote, the old woman named Lillian Harris, and the papers meant to frighten her before the sheriff came knocking. It was more than they had expected to gather on the first night inside the Magnolia Room. Not enough to close the case. Not yet. But enough to prove that Red Creek's rot had a voice, a schedule, and a table by the window. Then, Whitaker stopped. He had reached the mouth of the restroom hallway when he noticed them again, half hidden beneath the buzzing light, still eating quietly in the shadow where he had sent them. His eyes sharpened with amusement, then settled into something colder. Contempt had a way of finding second life when an audience was near. He struck his cane against the tile floor. Daniel's fingers closed around his fork. Whitaker stepped toward Maya's table. bending low enough that the smell of bourbon rolled over her plate. His eyes were wet with drink and power. "Law, was it?" he said with a sneer. "You sounded real proud saying that earlier. Like a black parrot taught to repeat words from a civics class." Maya looked up slowly. Whitaker smiled at the patience on her face and mistook it, again, for surrender. "Let me teach you something about reality," he said. "In this backwater county, the law sits in my pocket. Who do you think votes for me? Those poor fools down south? Those broken colored families writing complaints they can't even mail? They're tools. That's all. Tools for men like me to build with, profit from, and throw away when they get dull." Whitaker leaned closer. "People like you get a few words of education and start thinking it changes what you are. But the bottom is still the bottom. Sweetheart, dress it up. Bring it to a fine restaurant. Teach it to quote the law, and it still smells like where it came from." One of his assistants gave a thin laugh. Whitaker turned toward him, encouraged, then looked back at Maya. Look at her, sitting there trying so hard to look civilized. You think a decent dress and a tablecloth put you at the same table as white people with standing? You think manners can wash off skin, history, and poverty? The assistant beside him added, "Maybe she was just trying to get your attention, Mayor, hoping you'd sponsor her dinner with a little charity." Whitaker barked out a laugh. "Maybe so." He reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and flicked it toward Maya's plate. It landed across the shrimp and grits, soaking one edge in sauce. "Take it," he said. "Consider it a donation. Pay for your supper. Then pack yourselves up and get out of my town before I have the sheriff do it for you." Daniel's hand had tightened beneath the table. A vein stood out along his neck. He was waiting for one glance from Maya, one signal, one permission to stop pretending. Ruth's eyes did not leave Whitaker. Maya looked at the $100 bill lying across her food. For a moment, she said nothing. If you feel the humiliation Maya is being forced to swallow in this moment, please like this video and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Because who knows, there may be someone near you watching this same story right now. Then she blinked once, slowly, and stood. "Thank you for your generosity, Mr. Mayor," she said. Her voice was calm enough to make Daniel look at her twice. "I hope when you're standing before a federal judge, facing a seizure order on every asset you thought no one could touch, you still have this confidence and this smile." Whitaker frowned slightly. He had caught the first sentence. He had not fully heard the rest. The bourbon, the laughter, and his own certainty had dulled his ears. He saw only Maya's smile and assumed it meant he had broken her. "That's right," Whitaker said, straightening with satisfaction. "You remember this lesson." Maya did not answer at once. She only picked up the napkin from beside her fork and laid it over the ruined plate, covering the $100 bill and the shrimp and grits beneath one clean fold of white cloth. The gesture was so quiet that most people in the Magnolia Room missed it. But Sarah Monroe saw it. So did Ruth. So did Daniel, whose hand was still clenched beneath the table. "I will," Maya said. Whitaker gave a final contemptuous snort, turned, and walked away with his assistants and Sheriff Maddox following close behind. The front door opened, letting in a blade of cool evening air from the square, then closed behind them with a soft, expensive click. For several seconds, no one moved. The room had witnessed the cruelty, but witnessing was not the same as courage. A few guests stared at their plates. A man at the bar took a slow drink and pretended his hands were not shaking. An older woman near the wall dabbed at the corner of her eye with a linen napkin. Nobody spoke Whitaker's name. In Red Creek, even absence had ears. At the restroom side table, Daniel leaned closer to Maya, his voice low and rough. "Tell me you got that." Ruth touched the button on her jacket, eyes fixed on the door Whitaker had just exited. Every word. Maya looked down at the covered plate, the money hidden beneath the napkin like evidence waiting for a tag. "The bill stays right where it is until we photograph it." Daniel swallowed hard. "He threw money into your food. He also touched it," Maya said. "And he made a threat in front of half the restaurant." Ruth reached into her purse and pulled out a small compact, opening it as if checking her lipstick. The mirror caught the plate, the napkin, the corner of the table, and the room behind them. A tiny camera hidden behind the glass took 3 silent photos. Logged, Ruth murmured. Daniel finally unclenched his hand. 4 red crescents marked his palm where his nails had cut skin. Maya saw it and softened her voice. You did right. He gave a humorless laugh. Didn't feel like right. It rarely does in the middle of it. Sarah approached slowly, carrying an empty tray like a shield. Her face was pale, but the fear in her eyes had changed shape. Before, it had been the fear of someone trapped. Now it looked like someone standing at the edge of a choice. Ma'am, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know he would come back over. Maya turned to her. Sarah, listen to me carefully. Do not apologize for his behavior. Sarah glanced toward Thomas Hale, who was near the host stand, staring at the door as if hoping the entire evening would erase itself if he looked long enough. He'll blame me somehow. Mr. Hale always does when the mayor is angry. Has the mayor done this before? Ruth asked gently. Sarah's fingers tightened around the tray. Not exactly like that. Daniel looked up. But close. Sarah hesitated. He doesn't always say it out loud. Sometimes he just tells Mr. Hale to move people. Sometimes he says certain guests make the room look bad. Poor people. Mostly. Black families. Mexican workers from the packing plant. Once, an old veteran came in with mud on his boots after a funeral, and the mayor said he didn't want to smell the county cemetery while he ate. Ruth's face hardened. Lord have mercy. He thinks this whole place belongs to him, Sarah said. Maybe the whole town. Maya kept her tone calm. Why does Thomas let him? Sarah gave a small, bitter smile. Because the city can make life hard. Health inspections, liquor license, parking permits, fire code. My mom works at the county clerk's office. She says people who cross him don't get punished all at once. They get buried in paperwork until they can't breathe. The words landed close to what Maya had already read in the Red Creek file. Death by citation. Theft by ordinance. A whole town strangled with official forms. Maya said, Have you ever seen him use the private dining room and back? Sarah's eyes flicked up. That was answer enough. I can't. Sarah whispered. Maya did not push. A frightened witness was not a door to kick open. She was a person carrying weight that might crush her if handled carelessly. I'm not asking you to do anything tonight, Maya said. Just remember what you saw. Sarah looked at the covered plate. I saw all of it. Good. Thomas suddenly appeared behind her. Sarah, kitchen needs you. The girl flinched, then stepped back. Yes, sir. Thomas watched her go, then turned to Maya's table. His face had the slack exhaustion of a man who had spent years choosing the easy wrong and calling it survival. I truly am sorry, he said. Daniel's eyes lifted. You said that already. Thomas nodded. I know. Ruth folded her hands. Apologies don't move people back to the table they paid for, Mr. Hale. The manager's throat worked. You don't understand what he can do. Maya looked at him steadily. Then, tell us. Thomas stared at her for a moment, and behind his fear, something almost broke open. Then, habit won. He shook his head. I can't get involved. You already are, Maya said. You were involved the second you decided fear had more authority than policy. That struck him harder than anger would have. He looked toward the window table, now empty except for half-finished bourbon, steak plates, and one folded paper Clay Dobbs had forgotten to take from beneath the bread plate. Maya saw it at the same time Thomas did. For one breath, neither moved. Then Thomas stepped toward the table. But Ruth was faster in the quiet way only a seasoned investigator could be. She rose with a polite smile, picked up her water glass, and said, I think I left my reading glasses over there when we moved. Thomas froze. He knew she had not. But he also knew correcting her would draw attention. Ruth crossed the dining room slowly, every inch the harmless older woman. She passed the empty VIP table, set down her water glass, and glanced at the folded paper. Her body blocked the room's view for no more than 3 seconds. When she returned, the paper was gone. Daniel exhaled through his nose. Smooth. Ruth sat, opened her menu, and slid the folded sheet beneath it. I've had practice. Maya did not touch it yet. Not in the open. Instead, She reached for her purse and removed a small evidence sleeve, disguised as a plastic packet of tissues. Ruth slipped the paper inside under the table. Only then did Maya allow herself to glance down. It was a photocopied map of Carter Street. Several properties were marked in red. One circle had a handwritten note beside it. Harris pressure after Monday vote. Daniel's expression darkened. Lillian, Harris. Maya nodded. Same name Maddox mentioned. Ruth's voice dropped. They're moving fast. The front window reflected Red Creek's courthouse square outside. The statue, the flag, City Hall glowing beneath soft lights. To an outsider, it might have looked peaceful. To Maya, it looked staged, like a photograph taken just before a storm. She thought of the $100 bill under the napkin, the threat in Whitaker's voice, the complaints he claimed Maddox had intercepted before they could leave town. She thought of Lillian Harris, an old woman with a porch and a photo album, waiting for paperwork to scare her before a sheriff came knocking. Daniel leaned in. What's next, boss? Maya looked toward the empty window table. Now, she said, we meet Carter Street. Ruth placed the evidence sleeve into Maya's purse. Tonight? Tomorrow morning, Maya said. Whitaker thinks we'll run before sunrise. Let's disappoint him. Sarah passed by with a tray and glanced at Maya, just once. Maya gave her a small nod. Not a promise. Not yet, but something close enough for the girl to stand a little straighter as she walked back toward the kitchen. The Magnolia Room slowly returned to motion. Forks touched plates again. Conversations resumed in careful whispers. Thomas cleared the mayor's bourbon glass with both hands. But the room was not the same. Something had entered it and remained behind after Whitaker left. Not justice. Not yet. Only the knowledge that his words had been heard by someone who was not afraid to remember them. Maya took one final sip of iced tea. The sweetness had faded now, watered down by melted ice. Outside, beyond the glass, Red Creek's courthouse clock struck 9. By morning, the town would still belong to Harold Whitaker. But for the first time in years, someone was coming to ask who he had stolen it from. Morning came to Red Creek without hurry. A pale sun rose behind the water tower, brushing the courthouse dome, the church steeples, the boarded windows on Carter Street, and the neat white columns of City Hall with the same soft light. From a distance, the town looked almost peaceful. A man walking his old hound past the pharmacy tipped his cap to a woman unlocking the bakery. 2 boys on bicycles rattled past the barber shop. The flag in front of the courthouse lifted and fell in a weak breeze. But Maya William had learned long ago that quiet towns could hide loud suffering. She stood beside the rented Ford Taurus outside a motel on the edge of town, holding a paper cup of gas station coffee that tasted like burnt pennies. Daniel loaded a small evidence case into the trunk. Ruth sat in the passenger seat, reviewing the photocopied map of Carter Street they had recovered from Whitaker's table. 14 marked properties, Ruth said, tapping the page with one finger. 7 already transferred, 4 pending, 3 holdouts. Lillian Harris is one of them, Maya said. Daniel shut the trunk. If the map is accurate, she's not just a holdout. She's the next target. Ruth looked up over her glasses. And, if Maddox is supposed to scare her after Monday's vote, we don't have much time. Maya took one last sip of coffee and tossed the cup into the motel trash can. Then, we start with her. They drove through the main square first. Red Creek was awake now, but carefully. Men in work shirts stood outside the hardware store, speaking in low voices. Older women stepped out of the bakery with paper bags of biscuits, smiling at one another in that practiced Southern way that could mean warmth, caution, or both. A handwritten flyer for Mayor Whitaker's community renewal meeting was taped inside the diner window. Beneath his smiling campaign photo were the words, "Progress with Pride." Daniel glanced at it as they passed. Progress is doing a lot of heavy lifting. In towns like this, Ruth said. Progress usually means somebody's childhood home is about to become a parking lot. Maya watched the buildings change as they turned off Main Street. The brick storefronts gave way to smaller houses, cracked sidewalks, chain-link fences, and yards where old pecan trees threw shade over roofs that needed repair. Carter Street was not abandoned, no matter what Whitaker had said. It was tired, yes. Wounded, yes. But there were porch chairs facing the street, flower pots made from coffee cans, wind chimes hanging from eaves, and basketball hoops bent but still standing. Children had grown up here. People had married here, grieved here, prayed here, come home from war here. That mattered. Daniel slowed the car as they approached a yellow house with green shutters and a porch sagging slightly in the middle. A woman in a straw hat stood beside the steps, watering a row of potted geraniums. She was small, 70 or older, with silver hair braided at the back of her head and shoulders that had bent but not surrendered. She looked up when the Taurus stopped. "Mrs. Lillian Harris?" Maya asked. As she stepped out, the woman did not answer right away. Her eyes moved from Maya to Daniel, then Ruth, then the car's Georgia plate. She set down the watering can. "Depends who's asking." Maya smiled gently. "My name is Maya William. This is Daniel Brooks and Ruth Coleman. We're looking into some concerns about Carter Street." Mrs. Harris's face closed. "Reporters?" "No, ma'am." "City?" "No, ma'am." "Then you best say what you are before I decide whether to offer you lemonade or call my nephew." Ruth stepped forward, her voice warm. "Mrs. Harris, if you've got lemonade, we'd be grateful. If you've got a nephew, we won't blame you for keeping him close." For the first time, the old woman's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough to open the gate. "You talk like somebody's auntie," Mrs. Harris said. "I've been accused of worse." Mrs. Harris studied them another second, then nodded toward the porch. "Come on then. But I don't answer questions standing in the yard." The porch boards creaked beneath their feet. A ceiling fan turned lazily overhead, stirring warm air that smelled of cut grass, lemon oil, and old wood. On a small table beside the door sat a framed photograph of a younger Mrs. Harris standing beside a man in a mechanic's uniform. Behind them was the same house, freshly painted, with two little boys sitting on the steps. "My husband, Earl," she said when she saw Maya looking. "Gone 12 years now. He fixed half the engines in this county and undercharged everybody. He looks kind," Maya said. "He was stubborn," Mrs. Harris replied. "Which is sometimes the same thing when the world needs you to be." She brought out lemonade in tall glasses with too much ice, then lowered herself into a porch chair. Daniel stayed near the railing, watching the street without making it obvious. Ruth took out a small notebook but waited. Maya let the quiet settle first. Older people often told the truth better when no one rushed them. Mrs. Harris looked across the street at a boarded blue house. The Johnsons lived there. 3 generations. City said the porch was unsafe. Fined them every week until they sold. Over there was Miss Pearl's place. She made peach cobbler every 4th of July. They said her back taxes were wrong. Funny thing, nobody found the mistake until after she signed her deed away. Maya's voice was soft. "And your house?" Mrs. Harris gave a dry laugh. "My house has been inspected more than a hospital kitchen. Grass too high, mailbox crooked, rain gutter loose. One time they fined me because my trash bin was visible from the street. Same trash bin been in the same spot since 1988. Ruth's pen moved quietly. "Did Sheriff Maddox come here?" Maya asked. Mrs. Harris's eyes shifted to Daniel, then back to Maya. "Twice." "What did he say?" The old woman leaned back. "First time, he said accidents happen when elderly ladies live alone in houses too old to keep safe. Second time, he didn't say much, just stood right there by the steps, looking at my porch, my windows, my locks, like he was measuring how easy it would be to make me afraid." Daniel's jaw tightened. Maya asked, "Were you able to mail your complaints?" Mrs. Harris looked at her sharply. "Who told you about that?" "No one who should have known." The old woman sat very still. Then she rose slowly, went inside, and returned with a round cookie tin faded with Christmas holly. She placed it on the table and opened it. Inside were envelopes, copies of city notices, photographs, certified mail receipts, handwritten notes, and one postal receipt with a red stamp across it. "Undeliverable. I sent 6 complaints," she said. "State office, federal office, civil rights people, anybody I could find an address for. 3 came back. 2 disappeared. 1 envelope was opened and put back in my mailbox with no letter inside." Maya felt a familiar coldness move through her. Not surprise. Recognition. Ruth picked up one receipt with gloved fingers. "May I photograph these?" Mrs. Harris looked at Maya. "Will it matter?" Maya held her gaze. "Yes, ma'am. Maybe not by sundown. Maybe not by tomorrow. But it will matter." The old woman studied her for a long time. "You got children, Miss William?" "No, ma'am." "Well, I had 2 sons. One died in Desert Storm. The other moved to Ohio after he got tired of being pulled over every time he visited his own mama. This house is what I've got left of the life Earl and I built. Folks like Whitaker look at it and see land. I look at it and see birthday candles, funeral flowers, muddy shoes, Sunday dinners, and Earl sleeping in that chair with a ball game on." Her voice did not break. That made it hurt more. Maya looked at the old porch, the geraniums, the photograph, the cookie tin full of proof. Justice was not always a courthouse. Sometimes it was an old woman keeping receipts in a Christmas tin because the world kept pretending her pain was paperwork. A dark cruiser rolled slowly past the house. Daniel saw it first. Maddox. The sheriff did not stop. He did not need to. His car moved down Carter Street like a reminder. Mrs. Harris watched it go. "He does that every morning now." Maya closed the cookie tin gently. "Mrs. Harris, I need you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Don't confront anyone. Don't tell anyone we came. And if Maddox returns, you call this number." She wrote a secure line on the back of a plain business card and handed it over. Mrs. Harris looked at the card, then at Maya. "You never did say what you are." Maya stood. "Someone who believes a porch and a photo album can be braver than a mayor." For the first time, Lillian Harris smiled. As Maya, Daniel, and Ruth walked back to the car, the old woman remained on the porch, one hand resting on the cookie tin. The cruiser was gone, but the street had not relaxed. Curtains moved in nearby windows. Faces watched from behind glass. Carter Street had learned to survive by looking quietly. Daniel started the engine. "We have obstruction, intimidation, targeted code enforcement, and now possible mail tampering." Ruth looked back at Mrs. Harris's house. "We also have a witness who may not survive another visit from Maddox if Whitaker gets nervous." Maya stared down the road toward the courthouse square, where the mayor's flag still flew beneath the morning sun. "Then we make him nervous somewhere else," she said. Daniel glanced at her. "Where?" Maya's eyes hardened. "The Magnolia Room," she said. "Tonight." By late afternoon, Red Creek had turned the color of dust and brass. The sun hung low over the courthouse square, catching on windshields, church windows, and the gold letters painted on the front door of City Hall. Men came out of the hardware store carrying paper bags of nails and feed. A school bus coughed past the diner, dropping children along side streets where mothers waited on porches. Somewhere behind the Baptist church, somebody was mowing grass that smelled sweet in the heat. To a stranger, it could have looked like any small southern town settling into evening. To Maya William, it looked like a stage being reset before the second act. She sat in the passenger seat of the rented Ford Taurus parked half a block from the Magnolia Room, watching the restaurant's front door through the side mirror. Daniel was behind the wheel. Ruth sat in the back, reviewing the photographs from Mrs. Harris's cookie tin on a tablet dimmed low enough not to glow through the windows. 6 mailed complaints, Ruth said. 3 returned. 2 missing. 1 opened and placed back in her mailbox. If Maddox really intercepted them, Whitaker's little kingdom just stepped into federal airspace. Daniel looked across the street. "And if he gets a hint we visited her, she's exposed. That's why we don't let him look toward Carter Street tonight," Maya said. "We make him look at us." Ruth lifted her eyes. "That's a dangerous way to protect a witness. It's also the only way to keep his pride busy." Daniel turned slightly. "You sure you want to walk back into that room after last night?" Maya watched Thomas Hale unlock the restaurant door and step outside to adjust the brass sign. His movements were quick, nervous, like a man expecting bad weather, though the sky was clear. "I don't want to," Maya said. "But Whitaker thinks fear works because people leave after he uses it. Tonight, we don't leave." A silence settled in the car. It was not disagreement. It was the kind of silence agents shared before crossing a threshold where anything could happen. Ruth closed the tablet. "Same cover?" Maya nodded. "Same family." Same manners. Same table if they try to put us there. Daniel gave a dry laugh. You mean the restroom throne? Exactly. At 7:15, they crossed the street. The Magnolia Room smelled of butter, polished wood, and expensive nervousness. The Friday crowd had thinned into a different kind of gathering. Local businessmen, 2 city council members, an elderly couple celebrating an anniversary, a table of church ladies in pastel cardigans, and 3 men at the bar who stopped talking when Maya walked in. Thomas saw them and nearly dropped the menus in his hand. For 1 second, his face said what his mouth could not. Why did you come back? Maya smiled politely. Good evening, Mr. Hale. He swallowed. Ma'am, we'd like a table for 3. His eyes flicked toward the window table, then the rear hallway, then back to Maya. Of course, right this way. He did not offer the window. He did not offer the center. He led them, almost automatically, toward the small table near the restroom where they had sat the night before. Daniel leaned close to Maya. Subtle, Maya answered softly. Predictable is useful. Sarah Monroe appeared from the kitchen with a tray of bread plates and froze when she saw them. Her eyes widened first with fear, then with something like relief. She moved to their table as Thomas retreated. You came back, she whispered. Ruth settled into her chair. Food was good. Sarah almost laughed, then caught herself. You shouldn't be here. Maya unfolded her napkin. Neither should corruption. Yet here we are. Sarah looked toward the bar, then lowered her voice. Mayor Whitaker has a private dinner tonight. Back room. Mr. Dobbs is coming. Sheriff Maddox, too. Maybe others. What time? Maya asked. 8. Maybe a little after. Sarah hesitated. There's no camera in the private room. Mr. Hale had it disconnected years ago after the mayor complained about privacy. But the hallway camera still works. Ruth looked up. Do you have access? Sarah's face went pale. Maya shook her head gently. Don't answer that unless you choose to. The girl stood very still, tray pressed against her waist. My mother works in the county clerk's office. If I cross him, I know, Maya said. No, ma'am. You don't. Sarah's voice trembled. Last year, a man from the South Side spoke at a council meeting. 2 weeks later, his truck was impounded for unpaid tickets. He swore he'd already paid. Then, his daughter got pulled over 3 times in 1 month. People here learn real quick what speaking costs. Maya's expression softened. Then don't speak yet. Just listen and stay safe. Sarah blinked hard. Why are you helping us? Ruth answered before Maya could. Because somebody should have done it sooner. Sarah looked down at the table, and when she moved away, she left more than bread behind. Tucked beneath the folded napkin beside Maya's plate was a small slip of receipt paper. Maya waited until Sarah had crossed back to the kitchen before opening it under the edge of the menu. Back hall, 8:40, black case. Daniel read it upside down. She chose. Maya folded the slip once and slid it into her purse. Not fully, not yet, but enough. By 8 o'clock, Whitaker arrived. This time there was no loud demand for the window table. Thomas had left it empty for him from the beginning. Whitaker entered with Clay Dobbs, Vernon Pike, Sheriff Maddox, and a heavy-set man Maya did not recognize. He wore a tan sport coat, cowboy boots too clean for work, and a smile that looked practiced in bank offices. Ruth murmured, "Who's the new one?" Daniel angled his phone beneath the table, using the dark screen as a mirror. Could be the buyer. Maya watched the men shake hands. Or the bagman. Whitaker did not notice them at first. He was too busy being greeted. The councilman at the bar stood to shake his hand. One of the church ladies nodded stiffly. Thomas appeared with bourbon before Whitaker even sat down. Then Vernon Pike leaned toward the mayor and whispered something. Whitaker's eyes lifted. He saw Maya. For a moment, irritation crossed his face. Then amusement followed. Slow and mean. He did not come over. Not yet. He only raised his glass slightly toward her, as if toasting a dog that had learned to stay in the yard. Maya looked away first, deliberately. Men like Whitaker hated being ignored almost as much as they loved being feared. The group remained at the window table for 15 minutes, long enough to drink, laugh, and perform normalcy. Then Thomas approached. nervous, and guided them toward the private dining room in back. Sarah passed Maya's table with a pitcher of water. "Now?" Maya asked softly. 10 minutes, Sarah breathed. "They always order first. Then Mr. Hale locks the back service door." Ruth touched the button on her jacket again. "Directional mic won't reach through that wall cleanly." "It doesn't need to," Maya said. "We need the hallway." At 8:37, Ruth pressed her hand to her temple and sighed. "Maya, honey, I think my head's starting again." Daniel caught the cue. "You need your medicine. It's in my purse, but I may need some air." Maya rose. "I'll walk with you." They moved toward the restroom hallway slowly, Ruth leaning on Maya's arm with convincing weight. Daniel stayed at the table, watching Maddox's empty chair through the reflections. The hallway was narrow, painted cream, with framed photographs of Red Creek founders and old cotton mills lining the wall. At the far end, a door marked private dining stood slightly ajar. Voices rolled out, low and careless. Maya guided Ruth toward the restroom, then paused beside a side table stacked with extra napkins. From there, she could see the private room through the gap. Clay Dobbs stood near the table with the black case. The heavy-set man in the tan jacket opened it. Bundles of cash sat inside beside a folder with a blue city seal. Whitaker's voice followed, smooth as poured liquor. "Once the council vote is done, Carter Street clears. South Block first. Harris can cry to Jesus, the governor, or whatever federal office she thinks cares. It won't matter." Maddox laughed. "Not if her mail keeps getting lost." Ruth's eyes met Maya's. There it was. Not rumor, not implication, confirmation. Maya reached into her cardigan pocket and tapped the transmitter twice, sending the mark to Daniel's recorder. Inside the room, the heavy-set man asked, "And the last deed?" Whitaker replied, "Pressure after Monday. If the old woman still refuses, Carl pays another visit." Quietly, Maya's breath remained steady, but something inside her hardened. Then Vernon Pike turned. His eyes found the gap in the door. Maya shifted instantly, guiding Ruth toward the restroom as if nothing had happened. But Vernon stepped into the hallway before they could pass. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked. His smile did not reach his eyes. Maya gave him the same polite expression she had given Whitaker the night before. "Just helping my sister to the ladies' room." Vernon glanced at Ruth, then at Maya's cardigan pocket. "Funny," he said. "You sure do spend a lot of time near doors." Ruth let out a weak groan and gripped Maya's arm. "Young man, unless you're a doctor or the good Lord himself, I suggest you move before this headache becomes everybody's problem." For a second, Vernon looked like he might push harder. Then Whitaker called from inside. "Vernon." Vernon held Maya's gaze one beat longer, then stepped aside. Maya led Ruth into the restroom and shut the door behind them. Only then did Ruth straighten. "Got it?" she whispered. Maya nodded. "Got it." Ruth exhaled. He named Maddox, the mail, the vote, the money, and Mrs. Harris. Maya looked at her own reflection in the restroom mirror. The woman staring back still wore the plain cardigan, the modest dress, the calm face. Whitaker kept mistaking for weakness, but behind that face, the case had changed. "Call Atlanta," Maya said. "Tell them we're no longer building probable cause." Ruth's eyes sharpened. Maya turned from the mirror. "Tell them we're ready for the warrant." The restroom door clicked shut behind Maya and Ruth, cutting off the murmur of the private dining room. For a few seconds, neither woman moved. The restroom was small but spotless, with cream tile, brass fixtures, and a faint smell of lemon cleaner that could not quite cover the old dampness in the walls. A framed print of magnolia blossoms hung crooked above a little table, stacked with paper hand towels. From the other side of the door came the muffled sound of men laughing over money that had not belonged to them long enough to feel stolen. Ruth moved first. She reached beneath the edge of her shawl and pulled out a phone no larger than a deck of cards. It was not the one she had carried openly at dinner. This one had one purpose: secure contact with Atlanta. Maya stood at the sink, hands resting lightly on the marble counter, eyes fixed on her reflection. She looked like a woman who had been insulted twice in 2 nights and had not defended herself. She looked like a quiet customer in a modest dress, the sort of woman Harold Whitaker believed he could move from table to table with a cane and a sneer. That was the mask. Behind it, every word he had spoken was arranging itself into evidence. Ruth dialed, waited, then spoke in a voice barely above breath. Coleman, Red Creek, Priority Channel. Maya turned off the faucet, though she had not used it. The sound of running water might cover their voices, but it might also make Vernon Pike curious if he came too close to the door. Ruth listened. Yes, ma'am. We have direct audio confirmation. Whitaker named the council vote, the Carter Street pressure campaign, Sheriff Maddox's involvement, mail interference, and a payment exchange in the private dining room. We have visual confirmation of cash and a city-sealed folder in a black case. Possible contractor payoff. She paused. Yes. Inspector William is here. Maya held out her hand. Ruth passed her the phone. Maya, Deputy Director Elaine Foster said through the encrypted line. Her voice was calm, but Maya could hear the alertness beneath it. Tell me how solid. Solid enough to wake a judge, Maya said. Details. Maya kept her voice low and exact. Whitaker stated that complaints from Southside residents couldn't get past the Red Creek post office because Sheriff Maddox collected the forms. He confirmed the council vote Monday and said notices would go out Tuesday. He named Lillian Harris as a target and said Maddox would visit if paperwork didn't scare her first. Tonight, in the private dining room, he received or reviewed a black case containing cash and documents. He stated Carter Street would clear after the council vote. Maddox joked that Mrs. Harris's mail would keep getting lost. Elaine was silent for one beat. Did he know he was being recorded? No. Any risk to civilians? Rising. Vernon Pike saw us near the private room. He suspects something. Sarah Monroe, a waitress, may become a witness, but she's afraid. Lillian Harris is vulnerable. Maddox has already been surveilling her home. Are you compromised? Not fully. But the window is closing. Ruth stood beside the door, listening for footsteps. Elaine exhaled once, controlled and sharp. I'll contact the magistrate judge. We may be able to move on the warrant tonight if the audio is as clean as you say. It is. You'll need to maintain cover until we have paper. Maya glanced toward the restroom mirror again. In the reflection, Ruth's eyes met hers. Both women understood what that meant. Stay in the room with the men who would hurt them if they knew the truth. Smile if necessary. Eat if necessary. Let Whitaker keep believing cruelty was control. How long? Maya asked. I won't guess, Elaine said. Send the audio package through Ruth's channel. Stay visible, but don't provoke. If Pike presses, leave the restaurant and regroup. Maya's voice hardened. If we leave, Whitaker may send Maddox to Carter Street tonight. Then don't let him think about Carter Street. The line went quiet for half a second. Maya almost smiled. Understood. She handed the phone back to Ruth, who ended the call and began transferring the encrypted file. The progress bar crawled across the small screen. Outside the restroom, footsteps passed. Heavy, slow. Then they faded toward the kitchen. Ruth whispered, Vernon. Maya nodded. He's hunting for a reason, and if he finds one, then we give him the wrong one. Ruth studied her. Meaning? Maya opened her purse and removed a lipstick, a compact, and a folded receipt from dinner. To anyone who searched too quickly, the purse would look ordinary. The recorder was hidden in the lining. The transmitter had already sent the most important segment to Daniel. But Maya knew suspicious men often needed to find something to feel satisfied. She took a hotel key card from an inside pocket and slipped it into the outer compartment of the purse, along with a tourist brochure from Savannah and a handwritten note that read, Ask about property prices near Square. Ruth understood immediately. You want them to think we're buyers. I want Whitaker to think we're greedy, not federal. That may insult him less than being challenged. Exactly. The phone vibrated once in Ruth's hand. Upload complete. Maya took a breath. Let's go back. Ruth resumed her role before opening the door. Her shoulders rounded again. Her hand went to her temple. Her voice, when she spoke, became thinner, older, irritated with pain. If this headache gets worse, I'm blaming the catfish. Maya opened the door, and helped her into the hallway. Vernon Pike stood near the napkin station. He was not pretending well. One shoulder rested against the wall, but his eyes were fixed on them, flat and watchful. Behind him, the private dining room door was now closed. "Everything all right?" he asked. Maya gave him a polite smile. "Ladies' room usually doesn't require an escort." His gaze dropped to her purse. Ruth sighed loudly. "Young man, do you work here? Or do you just make women uncomfortable as a hobby?" Vernon's jaw tightened. Before he could answer, Sarah appeared at the end of the hall carrying a tray of coffee cups. Her eyes moved from Vernon to Maya and back again. "Mr. Pike," she said, voice careful. "Mayor Whitaker asked for more coffee." Vernon did not turn. "He can wait." Zara froze. Maya let the silence stretch just long enough for Vernon to notice Sarah watching him act like a guard dog in a public hallway. Then Maya said lightly, "It must be exhausting, protecting powerful men from women with headaches." Ruth coughed into her hand, hiding the smallest laugh. Vernon stepped closer. "You got a smart mouth for a visitor, and you have a strange interest in restroom traffic." The corner of his mouth twitched. "You folks really from Atlanta?" Daniel's voice came from behind him before Maya answered. "That's what we said." He stood at the hallway entrance, broad and calm, no longer seated. His hands were visible. His face gave nothing away. But the space changed when Daniel entered it. Vernon noticed. So did Sarah. Maya did not want a confrontation yet, not with civilians nearby. She touched Daniel's arm as she passed. "Honey, Ruth needs to sit down." Daniel held Vernon's gaze 1 second longer, then stepped aside. Of course, Vernon watched them return to the restroom side table. His suspicion had not faded, but it had not sharpened into certainty either. That mattered. In undercover work, survival often came down to keeping a dangerous man in the fog for one more minute. At the table, Daniel sat only after Maya did. "Atlanta?" he murmured. "Moving," Maya said. "How fast?" "Fast enough if we keep Whitaker occupied." Ruth lifted her water glass with both hands, playing tired while her eyes remained bright. "Pike suspects us." "He suspects everyone," Daniel said. "No," Maya replied. "He suspects us differently." A few minutes later, the private dining room opened. Whitaker came out first, his face flushed from bourbon and satisfaction. Clay Dobbs followed with the black case now in his hand. Sheriff Maddox tucked a toothpick between his teeth. The heavy-set man in the tan jacket shook Whitaker's hand with both of his, smiling too hard. Thomas Hale hovered near the bar, pretending not to notice the case. Sarah stood by the service station, holding the coffee tray no one had taken from her. Whitaker's gaze swept the room and landed on Maya again. This time, he did not laugh. He stared. Maybe it was the fact that she had returned after the first night. Maybe it was the calm way Daniel had appeared in the hallway. Maybe it was the simple refusal of Maya's face to carry the shame he had tried to place on it. Whatever the reason, something small and mean shifted in him. He walked toward their table, Daniel's hand lowered to his thigh, close to where a weapon would have been if they were not maintaining cover. Ruth's foot touched Maya's beneath the table. A warning, or a prayer. Whitaker stopped beside Maya's chair. "You ask a lot of questions for a woman passing through." Maya looked up with pleasant surprise, as though she had not expected him to speak. "Do I? You asked about Carter Street last night. I heard you mention it." His eyes narrowed. "And why would that interest you?" Maya lifted her glass. "My husband and I were thinking of buying property. Small town. Good square. Seemed like the kind of place people talk about opportunity." That word pleased him despite himself. Opportunity was the clean name men like Whitaker gave to taking. He looked at Daniel. "You buying land?" Daniel kept his voice even. "Considering it." Whitaker turned back to Maya. "With what money?" A faint smile touched her mouth. "The kind that spends." Clay Dobbs laughed from behind him. "She's got nerve." Whitaker did not laugh. He studied Maya's face like a man trying to decide whether a coin was real or counterfeit. Then he leaned down. "If you're looking at property in Red Creek, you talk to me first. People who go around me tend to find doors closed." Maya held his gaze. "Good to know." His eyes dipped briefly to her purse. Maya let him see the outer pocket slightly open, just enough for the hotel keycard and property brochure to show. Whitaker noticed. The suspicion in his face changed. Not gone, but redirected. Greed was a language he understood. Outsiders looking for cheap land made sense to him. Outsiders listening for federal crimes did not. He straightened. "Enjoy your dinner. We're trying," Ruth muttered. Whitaker ignored her and walked away. When he reached the front door, he turned to Thomas. "If they come back tomorrow, send them to my office before they start sniffing around real estate." Thomas nodded quickly. "Yes, Mayor." Then, Whitaker and his men stepped out into the night. Sarah came to clear an untouched plate from the next table. Her voice was so soft Maya almost missed it. "He believed you." Maya watched Whitaker's car lights flare outside the window. "For now," she said. Daniel exhaled slowly. "What happens when the warrant comes through?" Maya looked toward the front door, then toward the dark line of the road that led to Carter Street. "Then the king finds out the kingdom has borders." The word borders stayed in the air after Whitaker left. Maya did not move until the black SUV carrying the mayor and his men rolled away from the Magnolia Room and turned toward the courthouse square. Only then did she lower her glass, reach for her purse, and slide the hidden recorder deeper into the lining. Daniel watched the taillights disappear. He bought the property story. "For now," Maya said. Ruth dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin. "A man like that believes greed before he believes courage. It fits his view of the world." Sarah Monroe came to their table with the check, but she did not set it down right away. Her hand trembled slightly. She glanced toward Thomas Hale, who stood by the host stand with his back turned, pretending to polish menus that were already clean. Maya noticed the folded receipt paper tucked beneath Sarah's thumb. "Everything all right?" Maya asked. Sarah placed the check holder on the table. "Dessert is on the house tonight," she said, in a voice just loud enough for Thomas to hear. Then, softer, she added, "Don't open it until you're outside." Daniel looked at Maya. Ruth took one slow sip of water, giving no sign she had heard. Maya smiled politely. "Thank you, Sarah. That's kind." The girl swallowed. "No, ma'am. It's late." There was weight in the way she said late. Not only the hour. A warning. Maya paid in cash, leaving a tip large enough to be remembered but not so large that it looked like a signal. As they stood, Thomas hurried over, face pinched with worry. "Leaving already?" he asked. Maya looked at him calmly. It seems the room got quieter. Thomas tried to smile. It failed. "About earlier, and last night. I want you to understand. This is a small town. People do what they have to do." Ruth pulled her shawl around her shoulders. "No, Mr. Hale. People do what they decide to do. Then they tell themselves they had no choice." Thomas looked as if she had slapped him, but he did not argue. That was the thing about shame. If it was fresh enough, it still knew its own name. Outside, the night had cooled. The courthouse clock glowed above the square, and a few trucks sat angled along the curb outside the diner. Crickets hummed from somewhere behind the alley. Daniel unlocked the Taurus but did not open the doors. Maya took the check holder from her purse and slipped out the folded paper Sarah had hidden inside. 3 words were written in blue pen. "Maddox tonight. Harris." Daniel's face changed. Ruth looked once toward the dark road leading south. So Whitaker didn't wait. Maya folded the paper back into her palm. He got suspicious enough to cover loose ends. Daniel opened the driver's door. "We move now." They left the square without headlights for the first block. Then Daniel turned them on only after they reached the county road. Red Creek thinned quickly at night. The warm storefronts gave way to dark fields, then to scattered houses with porch lights glowing like small prayers. Maya sat forward, watching every side street. "Call Mrs. Harris," she said. Ruth dialed the secure number from her burner phone. It rang 5 times. 6, 7. No answer. Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. "Again," Maya said. Ruth called again. This time, the line picked up, but no one spoke. "Mrs. Harris," Ruth said gently. "It's Ruth Coleman. We spoke this morning." A faint rustle came through the speaker. Then Lillian Harris's voice, low and strained. "I can't talk long." Maya leaned closer. Mrs. Harris, is Sheriff Maddox there? He's on the porch. Daniel pressed the accelerator. Lillian continued, voice shaking but controlled. He says there's an emergency inspection order. Says if I don't open up, he'll come back with men to board the place for safety. Maya's eyes hardened. Do not open the door. He's not alone, Mrs. Harris whispered. There's another man with him. The one with the long face. I seen him with the mayor before. Vernon Pike, Daniel said. Maya took the phone. Mrs. Harris, listen to me. Stay away from the windows. Keep the line open if you can. We're close. The old woman gave a small, breathless laugh. Baby, I've been close to trouble longer than you've been alive. Then a hard knock came through the phone. Lillian Harris. Maddox's voice boomed faintly in the background. Open this door. City order. Maya spoke firmly. Mrs. Harris, go to the back room. Now. Daniel turned onto Carter Street so fast the tires gave a short cry against the pavement. The yellow house with green shutters was halfway down the block. A sheriff's cruiser sat at the curb with its lights off. Behind it was a dark pickup truck. On the porch, Sheriff Carl Maddox stood with one hand on his belt and a folded paper in the other. Vernon Pike lingered near the steps, smoking like a man waiting for permission to do worse. Daniel parked hard behind the cruiser. Maya was out before the engine settled. Maddox, she called. The sheriff turned, surprise flashing across his face before annoyance covered it. Well, look here. Atlanta property buyers out sightseeing after dark? Maya walked toward the porch without rushing. Daniel stayed half a step behind her. Ruth moved to the sidewalk, phone already recording openly now. This is private city business, Maddox said. You need to move along. Maya looked at the paper in his hand. Emergency inspection at 9:30 at night? Public safety doesn't keep bankers' hours. From inside the house, a curtain stirred. Maya saw Mrs. Harris's face for 1 second, then gone. Vernon flicked his cigarette into the yard. Lady, you got a habit of showing up where you don't belong. Maya stopped at the bottom of the steps. I could say the same for men threatening a 72-year-old widow after dark. Maddox's eyes narrowed. Careful. Daniel stepped closer. You first. The sheriff looked Daniel up and down, then smiled. You know, I can run your ID right now. Maya tilted her head. On what grounds? Suspicious activity. Standing on a public sidewalk. Interfering with an official duty. What duty? You have a warrant? Maddox lifted the paper. Inspection order. Signed by whom? City Code Office. That's not a warrant to enter a private home. His smile thinned. You a lawyer now? Maya let a small pause open. I know enough. Vernon moved off the steps. Carl, this is the woman from the restaurant. She's been listening too much. Maddox looked back at Maya, and for the first time, suspicion sharpened into something more dangerous. Is that so? Ruth spoke from the sidewalk. Sheriff, just so you know, this conversation is being recorded. Maddox's face hardened. You people really don't know when to quit. Maya's voice stayed even. Actually, that's exactly why we're here. Inside the house, Mrs. Harris called through the door, stronger now that she heard Maya outside. I'm not opening without a real warrant, Carl. Maddox turned toward the door. Lillian, don't make this worse. Maya stepped onto the first porch step. Daniel moved with her. Vernon's hand twitched near his jacket. Daniel saw it. His voice dropped. Don't. The word was quiet, but it changed the night. For a few seconds, the porch, the yard, the cruiser, and the old yellow house held still beneath the humming streetlight. Maddox looked from Maya to Daniel, from Ruth's phone to the dark windows where neighbors had begun to watch. Curtains shifted in 3 houses. A porch light came on across the street. That was what he had not planned for. Witnesses. Maddox lowered the paper slowly. This isn't over. Maya made his stare. No, it isn't. He stepped off the porch, shoulder brushing close to her as he passed. Daniel did not move. Vernon followed, but his eyes stayed on Maya. You're going to regret getting comfortable here, Vernon said. Maya looked at him. I was just thinking the same about you. Maddox and Vernon got into their vehicles. The cruiser pulled away first, then the pickup. Their taillights slid down Carter Street. and vanished beyond the bend. Only then did Mrs. Harris open the door. She stood in her housecoat, one hand pressed to her chest, the other gripping a cast-iron skillet. Ruth stared at it, then laughed softly with relief. "Mrs. Harris, were you planning to meet the sheriff with that?" Mrs. Harris lifted her chin. "I wasn't planning to meet the Lord empty-handed." Daniel let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Maya climbed the porch steps. "Are you hurt?" "No. Angry. That counts." Mrs. Harris looked past them at the neighbors peering from windows. "They came because of you." Maya shook her head. "They looked because of you. You didn't open the door." The old woman's mouth trembled once, then steadied. "I was scared." "Courage doesn't mean you weren't." For the first time that night, Mrs. Harris's shoulders lowered. Ruth gently took a photo of the so-called inspection order Maddox had dropped near the porch rail before leaving. Daniel collected it with gloves and placed it in an evidence sleeve. Maya looked down Carter Street. More porch lights were turning on now, one by one. Fear had ruled this street for years by isolating people house by house. Tonight, for a few minutes, it had failed. Her phone buzzed. A message from Atlanta appeared on the secure screen. "Magistrate reviewing. Stand by." Maya closed her hand around the phone. Daniel read her face. "Good news?" "Almost." Ruth stood beside Mrs. Harris on the porch, the cookie tin house behind them, the whole dark street ahead. Maya looked toward the square where City Hall hid behind distance and old power. "Whitaker just sent his sheriff to intimidate a federal witness," she said. "If the judge needed one more reason, he has it now." Mrs. Harris frowned. "Judge?" Maya turned back to her, and this time she allowed a little more truth into her voice. "Ma'am," she said, "by tomorrow Harold Whitaker may find out that Red Creek is not as far from the federal government as he thinks." The porch lights on Carter Street kept burning long after Sheriff Maddox and Vernon Pike disappeared into the dark. Maya noticed them as she stood beside Mrs. Harris's steps, one light after another flickering awake across the block. Not bright enough to chase away the night, not bold enough to be called a protest, but enough to say people were watching. In Red Creek, that was not a small thing. Fear had taught these families to close curtains, lower voices, and let trouble pass by without making eye contact. Tonight, the curtains had moved. Doors had cracked open. A man across the street stepped onto his porch in slippers, arms folded over his chest. An elderly woman in a housecoat stood behind a screen door, one hand resting over her heart. Mrs. Harris saw them too. "Well," she said quietly, still holding the cast-iron skillet at her side. "Looks like folks remembered they had windows." Ruth smiled. Sometimes courage starts as curiosity. Daniel took one last photograph of the paper Maddox had dropped. The so-called emergency inspection order was thin, sloppy, and unsigned by any judge. A city code stamp sat crooked in the corner, but the ink was too fresh and the language too broad. It gave Maddox no legal authority to enter the house, but it had never been meant to stand up in court. It had only been meant to frighten a widow into opening her door. Maya looked at it and felt the same cold anger she had felt in the Magnolia Room when Whitaker's $100 bill landed in her food. Not loud anger, not reckless anger, a deeper kind, the kind that kept score. Daniel sealed the paper in an evidence sleeve. "This is garbage. Garbage with fingerprints," Ruth said. Mrs. Harris looked from one to the other. "You keep talking like this is bigger than my house." Maya turned to her. "It is. But your house may be where it finally breaks open." The old woman's hand tightened around the skillet handle. "Then I hope it breaks loud." A secure phone vibrated in Ruth's pocket. Everyone went still. Ruth took it out, read the screen, and looked at Maya. The porch light cut sharp lines across her face. "Atlanta." Maya stepped away from the porch, closer to the edge of the yard, and took the call. "William." Deputy Director Elaine Foster's voice came through low and controlled. The magistrate reviewed the first audio package and the Harris incident. "We have enough for emergency action. A federal arrest warrant is being drafted for Harold Whitaker. Search and seizure orders are being prepared for his campaign office, City Hall records, the private dining room, and accounts connected to the Carter Street redevelopment entities." Maya closed her eyes for one brief second. Not relief. Focus. "How soon?" The paper should be signed before morning. But listen carefully, Maya. Until that warrant is in your hand, you do not confront him. You maintain cover. You keep your witness safe. And you do not let Maddox disappear evidence. Maya glanced toward the dark road where the sheriff's cruiser had gone. He'll run to Whitaker. Good, Elaine said. Let them panic. Panicked men make calls. Ruth, standing close enough to hear Maya's side of the conversation, nodded slightly. Daniel watched the street. Elaine continued. We're sending a support team from Atlanta. U.S. Marshals will assist with the arrest. FBI public corruption will support the document seizure. Local law enforcement is not to be notified. We don't know who is clean. Nobody in Red Creek uniform gets advance notice, Maya said. Exactly. What about Mrs. Harris? Can she leave town tonight? Maya looked back at the old woman standing on her porch, chin lifted, skillet in hand. Her house behind her like a memory made of wood. I doubt it. Mrs. Harris seemed to know she was being discussed. If that woman on the phone is telling you to move me out, you tell her no. Maya almost smiled. She says no. Elaine heard it. Then keep a federal presence near the house without exposing the operation. I can leave Daniel nearby. Daniel's eyes moved to Maya. He gave one firm nod. Do it, Elaine said. And Maya? Yes, ma'am. Whitaker is not just a mayor anymore. Once this warrant is active, he's a cornered man with money, loyalists, and a sheriff. Don't underestimate what pride will do when it realizes prison is real. The line ended. Maya stood for a moment with the phone in her hand, listening to the nighttime sounds of Carter Street. Crickets, a distant dog, a screen door closing, Mrs. Harris's porch fan clicking in tired circles. The world had not changed yet. Whitaker was still free. Maddox still wore a badge. City Hall still held records that could vanish before sunrise. But somewhere in Atlanta, a judge was putting ink to paper, and that made the air feel different. Ruth stepped close. Signed? Before morning. Daniel exhaled through his nose. Then tonight is the dangerous part. Maya nodded. Maddox will report back. Whitaker will either destroy records or try to prove he's still in control. Ruth looked toward Mrs. Harris. Or both. Maya returned to the porch. Mrs. Harris, Daniel is going to stay close tonight. You may not see him, but he'll be nearby. Keep your doors locked. Keep your phone charged. If anyone comes back, you call the number I gave you. And do not open that door. Mrs. Harris frowned at Daniel. You planning to sit outside my house all night? Yes, ma'am, Daniel said. You got coffee? No, ma'am. She turned and went inside. A minute later, she came back with a thermos and a paper sack. Fried chicken biscuit from this morning. Don't tell me you're too professional to eat. Daniel accepted both with unexpected gentleness. Thank you, ma'am. Mrs. Harris looked him over. And if that sheriff comes back, you make sure he understands I'm not the one trespassing. Daniel's face softened. I'll make that clear. Maya and Ruth drove away from Carter Street 15 minutes later, leaving Daniel in the shadow of an old pecan tree in a borrowed pickup. Mrs. Harris's nephew had parked behind the next house years ago and never reclaimed. He would be invisible unless needed. That was Daniel's specialty. Back at the motel, Maya and Ruth did not sleep. Their room smelled of stale carpet, coffee, and the lemon disinfectant the motel used too generously. A small television flickered silently in the corner with the local news. On the screen, Mayor Whitaker's smiling campaign photo appeared in a segment about the upcoming council vote. The caption read, Red Creek Renewal Plan, expected to pass Monday. Ruth sat at the little round table by the window, downloading and labeling files. Audio 1, Restaurant Public Remarks. Audio 2, VIP Table Discussion. Audio 3, Private Dining Room, Carter Street Confirmation. Audio 4, Maddox Threat at Harris Residence. Maya stood over the map of Carter Street, spread across the bedspread. Red circles marked houses. Blue circles marked businesses tied to Clay Dobbs. Yellow highlighted city offices and record storage. One line connected the Magnolia Room to City Hall to a shell company in Macon. Ruth glanced at her. You're quiet. I'm thinking about what he said. Whitaker says a lot of things. Not him. Mrs. Harris. Maya touched the marked house on the map. She said she hopes it breaks loud. Ruth leaned back. People who have been silenced don't always want revenge. Sometimes they just want the truth to make a sound. Maya looked toward the window. Outside, the motel parking lot was dim and nearly empty. A semi-truck idled near the far end. A neon vacancy sign buzzed in red. At 2:14 a.m., Ruth's secure phone vibrated again. She read the message, then stood. Maya. Maya turned. Ruth held out the screen. Warrant. Signed. Delivery team. En route. Hold position. Until contact. For the first time that night, Maya allowed herself one slow breath all the way in. Then, headlights swept across the motel curtains. Not one car. 3. Ruth turned off the lamp. Maya moved to the side of the window and parted the curtain with 2 fingers. A black county cruiser rolled slowly through the lot. Behind it came Vernon Pike's pickup. And behind that, a dark SUV Maya had seen parked outside the Magnolia Room. Ruth whispered, "They found the motel." Maya let the curtain fall back into place. Her face was calm, but her eyes had changed. "Call Daniel," she said. "Tell him Whitaker isn't going after Mrs. Harris now." Ruth already had the phone in hand. "Where's he going?" A heavy knock struck the motel room door. Maya reached into her purse, her fingers closing around the badge she still could not show too soon. "Here," she said. The knock came again, harder this time. Not frantic, not uncertain. Official. 3 heavy strikes against the thin motel door, each one carrying the weight of men who had spent years being obeyed before they had to explain themselves. Maya stood still beside the bed, one hand inside her purse, fingers wrapped around the leather case that held her badge. Ruth was near the table, secure phone pressed against her chest, the glow of the signed warrant message still fading from the screen. Outside, through the narrow gap in the curtains, red and white light slid across the room in slow bars, though the cruiser's siren remained silent. "Maya," Ruth whispered. "I know." Another knock. "Open up," Sheriff Carl Maddox called from outside. "County Sheriff's Office." Maya looked at Ruth and lowered her voice. "Is Daniel on the line?" Ruth nodded once. He picked up. He heard the knock. "Tell him to stay with Mrs. Harris, unless I say otherwise." Ruth's eyes flashed. "They're here, and that means she's alone if he leaves." Ruth understood, even if she hated it. She brought the phone closer to her mouth. "Daniel, hold position. Do not leave Carter Street, unless Maya calls it." A pause. Then Ruth looked up. "He says that's a bad idea." Maya almost smiled. "Tell him, I agree." The third knock rattled the chain latch. "Maya William," Maddox called, the friendliness gone from his voice. "We know you're in there. Open the door." Ruth's face tightened. "They used your real name. That changed the room." Maya removed her hand from the badge but did not pull it out. "Then someone ran us. Or Sarah broke." "No," Maya said. "Not Sarah." She crossed to the door, keeping her body slightly to the side instead of directly in front of it. Old training. Old instinct. Through the peephole, she saw Maddox standing under the yellow motel light, hat brim low, one hand resting near his belt. Vernon Pike stood behind him, arms loose, eyes alive with anticipation. 2 of Whitaker's assistants lingered near the black SUV. This was not a lawful visit. It was pressure dressed in a badge. Maya raised her voice. "Sheriff, do you have a warrant?" Maddox smiled in a way that distorted through the peephole. "Funny question coming from you. Answer it." "I have reasonable suspicion." "Of what?" "Impersonation, fraud, suspicious activity. Maybe a little conspiracy if you make me work for it." Ruth's eyebrows lifted. She mouthed, "Desperate." Maya nodded. The recorder on the table was already running. "Sheriff," Maya said through the door, "unless you have a warrant signed by a judge, we are not opening this room." The silence outside lasted 2 seconds. Then Vernon stepped closer. "Lady, this is a county motel. Doors open real easy when management cooperates." Maya turned her head toward Ruth. "Pack the files." Ruth moved at once, sliding the tablet, the evidence sleeves, and the backup drive into a plain overnight bag. The original recordings had already uploaded to Atlanta, but physical evidence still mattered, and Maya was not handing Maddox a single scrap. Outside, Maddox spoke again, louder now. You came into my county under false pretenses. You harassed public officials. You interfered with a city inspection. You've been asking questions about private property you don't own. Now you can open this door like a polite woman, or I can open it for you. Maya looked at the flimsy chain, the old deadbolt, the cheap motel wood. It would not hold long if they forced it. Ruth lifted the bag. Back window? Maya glanced toward the bathroom. The room was on the ground floor. A small frosted window opened behind the shower. Too narrow for Daniel. Wide enough for Ruth if she squeezed. Wide enough for Maya, too. Then a new voice came from outside. Sheriff, I don't want trouble at my motel. The manager. Mr. Ellis, an older white man with a tobacco-rough voice and a saint's cap, though they were nowhere near Louisiana. Maya had noticed him at check-in. 65, maybe older. Arthritis in his left hand. Korea veteran pin on the corkboard behind the counter. Maddox answered him with false patience. Ben, go back to the office. I said, I don't want trouble. And I said, go back to the office. The shift in Maddox's tone was small but ugly. It was the sound of power dropping its manners. Maya's jaw tightened. She could protect Ruth. She could protect evidence. But if the motel manager stood between Maddox and the door, he could get hurt. Ruth, Maya whispered. Bathroom window. Take the bag. Get to the drainage ditch behind the building and call Atlanta. Tell them local law enforcement is attempting unlawful entry. Ruth stared at her. I'm not leaving you. You are preserving evidence. That is not the same sentence. It is tonight. The doorknob jerked once from the outside. Maya's voice sharpened. Go. Ruth cursed under her breath with the elegance of a churchwoman trying not to sin, then slipped into the bathroom. The window frame squealed softly as she forced it open. Maya returned to the door. Sheriff Maddox, this is your final notice. Any attempt to enter without a judicial warrant is being recorded. Vernon laughed. She still thinks words matter. Maya spoke calmly. Words are why you're here. That stopped him for half a breath. Then a key scraped in the lock. Management had not given it willingly. Maya knew that by the sound of Mr. Ellis protesting outside. Sheriff, I never said you could take that. The deadbolt held. The chain held. Then something heavy struck the door near the lock. Once. Twice. The frame cracked. Maya stepped back. Right hand finally closing around the badge case in her purse. Left hand lifting the small can of pepper spray she had kept in the side pocket for exactly this kind of narrow space emergency. She did not want a shootout in a motel. She did not want bullets through thin walls. She needed seconds, not heroics. The third blow splintered the latch. The door flew inward. Maddox stepped through first, hand on his sidearm but not drawn. Vernon came behind him with the grin of a man who thought the law had already lost. Maya stood in the center of the room, empty-handed now except for the pepper spray hidden against her palm. Maddox looked past her. Where's the other one? Maya gave him a mild expression. Who? His eyes swept the room. Don't play games. You broke into a motel room without a warrant, Sheriff. I'm not the one playing. Vernon moved toward the table. Search the place. Maya stepped in his path. No. He leaned close. You don't tell me no. Maddox pulled a folded paper from his pocket and snapped it open. County investigative hold. That gives me authority. Maya glanced at it. That gives you a vocabulary problem. Not authority. His face darkened. Outside, Mr. Ellis hovered in the doorway, breathing hard. Sheriff, you can't just bust up my rooms. Maddox turned on him. Ben, I swear to God. Maya used the moment. She raised the pepper spray and hit Vernon directly in the eyes. He screamed, stumbling backward into the TV stand. Maddox spun, hand dropping toward his gun. But Maya had already moved. She kicked the room door wider, shoving Vernon's body into Maddox's line of motion, then drove her shoulder into the sheriff's chest with enough force to knock him off balance. Not to win. To get out. Mr. Ellis, move! She shouted. The old motel manager staggered aside as Maya burst into the walkway. Behind her, Vernon cursed, and Maddox roared her name. Across the lot, the black SUV's headlights flared on. Maya ran toward the side of the building instead of the car. A shot was not fired. Maddox was corrupt, not stupid. Too many motel doors had opened now. Faces peered out. A woman in curlers yelled, "What in God's name is going on?" A trucker stepped from his room holding a tire iron. Witnesses were multiplying. Maya rounded the corner and found Ruth crouched near the drainage ditch. Overnight bag clutched against her chest. "Took you long enough," Ruth hissed. "Vernon wanted to talk. Did you let him?" With pepper spray, they moved low along the back of the building. Ruth's phone was already connected. "Atlanta is 10 minutes out," she said. "State troopers are being looped in through federal command. Clean units only." Maya heard footsteps pounding around the corner behind them. "Maddox, split?" Ruth asked. "No, he wants me." They reached the shadow behind the laundry shed. Maya stopped, turned, and pulled the badge case from her purse at last. Maddox came around the corner, breathing hard. Gun now drawn low but visible. "Don't make another mistake, Sheriff," Maya said. He froze at the sight of the badge. For the first time since she had met him, Carl Maddox looked uncertain. Maya held the badge steady in the dim motel light. "Senior Federal Inspector Maya William. Lower your weapon." Maddox's mouth opened, but no words came out. Behind him, sirens began to rise in the distance. Not local sirens, different pitch. Multiple vehicles, coming fast. Ruth stepped beside Maya, overnight bag secure in one hand, phone recording in the other. Maya kept her eyes on the sheriff. "You should have stayed on Carter Street," she said. "At least there. You were only intimidating a witness. Here, you just broke into a federal operation." Maddox looked toward the road, toward the approaching lights, toward the motel rooms where people were still watching. His kingdom had followed him into the dark, but this time, the dark had witnesses. And far down the county road, the law he had spent years mocking was finally arriving with lights on. For one long second, Sheriff Carl Maddox stood in the shadow behind the motel laundry shed, with his gun lowered but still in his hand, staring at the badge Maya William held in the dim light. "Senior Federal Inspector." The words seemed to move through him slowly, like something cold entering his bloodstream. Behind Maya, Ruth Coleman kept her phone raised, recording every breath, every twitch, every mistake Maddox might still be foolish enough to make. Beyond the motel, sirens grew louder along the county road, slicing through the night that Red Creek had spent too many years believing belonged to Whitaker and his men. Maddox swallowed. His eyes shifted from Maya's badge to Ruth's phone, then toward the motel rooms where doors had opened, and frightened strangers watched from behind curtains and cracked doorways. A trucker in a faded Braves t-shirt stood near the vending machine, still gripping a tire iron. Mr. Ellis, the motel manager, leaned against the corner of the building with one hand pressed to his chest, his face white with shock and anger. Maya did not raise her voice. "Lower the weapon, Sheriff." Maddox's jaw worked. "You should have identified yourself. You should have brought a warrant. That room was part of an investigation." "No," Maya said. "That room was part of your panic." The approaching sirens turned into flashing lights as 3 black federal vehicles swung into the motel lot, followed by 2 Georgia State Patrol cruisers. Tires crunched over gravel. Doors opened. Men and women in tactical vests moved quickly, but with discipline. Weapons angled down, eyes scanning. "Gun!" one of them shouted. Maddox flinched. Maya's voice cut through the moment. "Sheriff Maddox, put the firearm on the ground." Slowly, for a heartbeat, pride tried to argue with survival. Then, Maddox bent, placed the gun on the dirt, and lifted both hands. 2 federal agents moved in and secured him. One kicked the weapon away. Another pulled Maddox's hands behind his back. The sound of handcuffs closing was sharp and final. Maddox turned his head toward Maya as the cuffs locked. "You don't know what you're stepping into." Maya slid her badge back into its case. "I know exactly what I stepped into. You just confirmed it." Across the lot, Vernon Pike stumbled out of the motel room with both hands pressed to his face, cursing through tears from the pepper spray. A federal agent ordered him to stop. Vernon tried to swing blindly, missed badly, and was taken to the pavement with the efficiency of people who had no interest in drama. Mr. Ellis limped toward Maya, still shaken. He took my master key. I told him no. I swear to God. I told him no. Maya turned to him. I believe you, Mr. Ellis. His eyes went wet. Not with weakness, but with the exhaustion of a man who had spent years saying yes to people he hated because no one with authority had ever stood beside him when he said no. He's done this before, Mr. Ellis whispered. Not busting doors, maybe, but coming around, asking who checked in, wanting names, plates, folks passing through who asked too many questions. I thought if I kept my head down, he'd leave my place alone. Ruth lowered her phone slightly. Men like that don't leave anything alone. They just decide when to collect. A woman in a federal jacket approached Maya. She was in her 40s, dark-haired, composed, with the sleepless look of someone who had driven hard from Atlanta. Inspector William? Maya nodded. Special Agent Karen Holt? That's right. Public Corruption Unit. Holt glanced toward Maddox being escorted to a cruiser. Looks like we arrived after the welcome party. He forced entry into our room without a warrant, attempted unlawful search, and drew his weapon after I identified myself. Ruth lifted her phone. Recorded. Holt gave a grim nod. Good. Another agent came from the motel room carrying the overnight bag Ruth had protected. Evidence bag secured. Room is clear. Some damage to the door frame. Mr. Ellis groaned. That door was new in 2009. Despite the tension, Ruth gave him a sympathetic look. Sir, after tonight, you may be able to bill the county. That'll be the day, he muttered. Maya looked toward the road. Where are we on Whitaker? Holt's expression shifted into business. Arrest warrant is signed. Search and seizure orders are signed for City Hall records, Whitaker's campaign office, the private dining room at the Magnolia Room, and financial records tied to the redevelopment shell companies. U.S. Marshals are 5 minutes behind us. Does Whitaker know? Not from us. Maya looked at Maddox. He was being placed in the back of a state patrol cruiser. Face gray, eyes burning. He'll try to call. Already took his phone, Holt said. But if Whitaker sent him here, he may expect an update. He'll get nervous when he doesn't receive one. Holt studied Maya. Then, we move. Before nerves become fire. Maya nodded. The Magnolia Room first. Ruth stepped closer. The black case was there tonight. Clay Dobbs left with it. But the private dining room may still have prints, documents, camera gaps, maybe cash traces. Sarah Monroe can confirm hallway traffic. But she's vulnerable. Where is she now? Holt asked. Probably closing the restaurant, Maya said. Unless Whitaker already pulled her in. Daniel's voice came through Ruth's secure phone before anyone could answer. Maya. Ruth raised the phone. He's still on. Maya took it. Daniel. Mrs. Harris is safe. Porch lights still on. Neighbors awake. But a car just went past slow twice. Not Maddox's cruiser. Dark sedan. Could be one of Whitaker's people. Stay with her. I heard sirens from your direction. You good? Maya looked at Maddox in cuffs, Vernon on the pavement, the cracked motel door, Ruth holding the evidence bag, and the flashing lights painting Red Creek's night in federal blue and white. I'm good. Daniel was silent for half a second. That means it was bad. It means stay with Mrs. Harris. Yes, boss. The line clicked off. Special Agent Holt turned to her team. 2 units. Stay with the motel scene. Secure statements from Mr. Ellis and any witnesses who saw forced entry. State Patrol maintains custody of Maddox until federal transfer. Pike goes with us after medical clears his eyes. William, Coleman, you ride with me. Maya glanced once toward the motel room. The broken door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the lamp still glowed over the torn bedding, the scattered papers, the ordinary ugliness left behind when corrupt men thought fear gave them permission to enter any room they wanted. Mr. Ellis followed her gaze. You think this will really change anything? Maya looked at him. It already has. He frowned. She nodded toward the motel walkway, where guests still stood outside their rooms, whispering, watching Sheriff Maddox sit handcuffed behind glass. For years, people saw him arrive and wondered who he came to scare, Maya said. Tonight they saw him leave in cuffs. That changes what people believe is possible. Mr. Ellis looked toward the cruiser. His mouth trembled once before he pressed it flat. My wife used to say this town needed a window opened. Ruth smiled softly. Then let's hope tonight is a draft. They left the motel 5 minutes later. Maya sat in the back of Holt's SUV with Ruth beside her, the evidence bag between them. The convoy moved without sirens now, only lights hidden beneath grills, slipping through Red Creek like a truth not yet announced. Storefronts passed in shadows. The diner was dark except for one light above the cash register. City Hall stood at the far end of the square, white columns glowing under security lamps. The courthouse clock read 2:43 a.m. Ruth looked out the window. Small towns sleep light when they're guilty. Maya's eyes moved to the top floor of City Hall. One window was lit. Holt saw it too. Someone's inside. At this hour? Ruth asked. Maya leaned forward. Whitaker's office? Holt checked a tablet. Top floor, southeast corner. That's his suite. The SUV slowed at the corner. Through the lit window, a figure moved past the blinds. Then another. Maya's pulse steadied. Panic had started. Pull around back, she said. If they're destroying records, they won't use the front door. Holt spoke into her radio. All units, switch to silent approach. City Hall rear access. Possible active destruction of evidence. The convoy split cleanly. One vehicle continued past the square. Another turned down the alley behind the courthouse. Holt's SUV rolled toward the rear parking lot of City Hall. Headlights off now. Engine low. Behind the building, a service door stood propped open with a cardboard box. A man in shirt sleeves hurried out carrying a banker's box stuffed with folders. He stopped when he saw the dark SUV glide into the lot. For 1 second, he froze like a deer in headlights that were not even on. Then he dropped the box and ran. Holt's agents were already moving. "Federal agents!" someone shouted. "Stop!" The man slipped on loose gravel and went down hard. Papers spilled across the pavement, white sheets fluttering under the security light. Maya stepped out and picked one up with gloved fingers. Carter Street, Redevelopment Authority. At the bottom was a signature line. Harold Whitaker. Ruth came beside her, reading over her shoulder. "Looks like the king couldn't sleep." Maya looked up at the lit office window. "No," she said. He finally heard the borders closing. The man in shirt sleeves hit the gravel hard, one arm sliding through the scattered papers as 2 federal agents reached him. "Hands where I can see them," one agent ordered. "I work here," the man gasped. "I work for the city." Maya stepped closer. The Carter Street document still held carefully between her gloved fingers. "Then, you know, city records don't usually leave through the back door at 2:45 in the morning." He looked up at her, breathing fast. He was in his late 30s, thin, with a loosened tie and a face shining with sweat. His name badge had flipped backward on its lanyard. Special Agent Holt bent and turned it over. "Evan Price," Holt read. "Deputy Clerk." Evan swallowed. "I was told to move archived files." Ruth looked at the banker's box spilled across the pavement. Archived files? Several folders lay open under the security light. Carter Street Redevelopment Authority. Emergency Code Enforcement Actions. Southside Acquisition Schedule. Returned Correspondence Log. One folder had a sticky note attached in red ink. "Destroy after council vote." Ruth gave Evan a look over her glasses. "Son, if this is your idea of archiving, I would hate to see spring cleaning." Evan's mouth trembled. "I didn't write that." Maya crouched so her voice could stay low. "Who told you to move these?" He looked toward the lit window on the top floor. Nobody had to ask again. Holt spoke into her radio. "Team 1, rear entry. Team 2, cover front. We have active removal of evidence and probable destruction. Execute search order." The quiet rear parking lot came alive without chaos. Agents moved with practiced speed. One secured Evan Price. Another photographed the fallen box before touching anything. Ruth began placing loose documents into evidence sleeves, calling out labels in a calm voice. Carter Street Acquisition List. Returned mail log. Code Enforcement Schedule. Handwritten destruction note. Maya looked up at City Hall. For decades, The building had been painted every few years and photographed on election mailers under words like honor, service, tradition. But at this hour, with the back door propped open and files spilling onto gravel, it looked less like a symbol of democracy than a house caught hiding stolen goods before dawn. Holt nodded toward the door. "William, with me." They entered through the rear corridor. Inside, City Hall smelled of floor wax, paper, and old coffee. Emergency lights glowed faintly along the hallway. Framed portraits of past mayors watched from the walls, all of them stern, all of them certain they would be remembered kindly. Somewhere above them, drawers opened and slammed. The agents took the stairs instead of the elevator. At the second-floor landing, a woman's voice whispered frantically. "He said, take everything with Carter Street on it." Another voice answered, "I'm not going to prison for him." Maya paused at the corner. Holt lifted one hand, signaling silence. At the end of the hallway, outside the mayor's suite, two staffers stood beside three bankers' boxes. One was a middle-aged woman in a cardigan and sneakers, clutching a stack of folders against her chest. The other was a young man with printer toner on his sleeve and panic in his eyes. Both froze when federal agents stepped into view. "Federal agents," Holt said. "Step away from the boxes." The woman dropped the folders as if they had burned her. The young man raised both hands immediately. Maya looked through the open door of the mayor's office. Harold Whitaker stood behind his desk. His suit jacket was gone. His red tie hung loose. His silver hair, so perfectly controlled at dinner, had fallen slightly out of place. One desk drawer stood open. A shredder hummed beside the credenza, its bin already full of thin paper strips. On the desk lay a half-packed leather briefcase, a stack of checks, 2 cell phones, and a framed photo of Whitaker shaking hands with the governor. For the first time since Maya had seen him, the mayor looked less like a king than a man caught in his own castle after the gates had closed. His eyes locked on her. "You." Maya stepped into the office. "Good morning, Mayor." Whitaker looked past her at the agents, then at Holt. "What is this?" Holt held up a folded document. "Federal search and seizure warrant for these premises, including all records related to the Carter Street redevelopment project, campaign finances, city contracts, and communications with Sheriff Carl Maddox, Clay Dobbs, Vernon Pike, and associated entities." Whitaker's face flushed. "This is outrageous. You can't just walk into City Hall in the middle of the night." Maya looked at the shredder. "You seem to think the middle of the night was a good time for city business." His eyes flickered. Holt signaled an agent toward the shredder. "Photograph before removal. Preserve contents." The agent unplugged the machine. Whitaker slammed his palm on the desk. "I am the elected mayor of this town, and still subject to federal law," Holt said. He turned his glare back to Maya. "You set me up." "No," Maya said. "You sat at your own table and talked." His mouth tightened. For 1 second, she saw the memory pass through him. The restaurant, the restroom table, the $100 bill landing in her plate, the smile he had misunderstood. "You were recording me," he said. Maya did not answer. She did not need to. Whitaker laughed once, sharp and desperate. "You people really do come into a town and think you understand it after 2 nights. Ruth appeared at the office door with an evidence sleeve in hand. "We understand the part where federal complaints never left the post office." Whitaker's eyes cut to her. Ruth smiled faintly. That was a memorable sentence. An agent at the desk lifted the framed governor photograph. Behind it was an envelope taped to the back. He removed it carefully and opened it just enough to see inside. "Cash," he said. Holt turned to Whitaker. "Do you want to explain that now, or would you prefer counsel present?" Whitaker's jaw clenched. He reached for one of the phones on the desk. "Don't," Maya said. He paused, then picked it up anyway. 2 agents moved instantly. One took his wrist. The phone hit the desk and slid across the wood. Whitaker jerked back, anger breaking through panic. "Get your hands off me." Holt's voice cooled. "Mayor Whitaker, interfere with this search again, and you will be restrained." He looked around the room, searching for the old arrangement of power. Staffers who would obey, police who would protect, businessmen who would laugh. Thomas Hale lowering his head, Sarah stepping back. Mrs. Harris behind a locked door. None of them were here. Only federal agents. Only paper. Only the woman from the restroom table. Maya walked to the shredder bin and looked down at the thin strips inside. Some still showed partial words. Harris, Acquisition, South Block, Maddox. You tried to scare an old woman out of her house, she said quietly. Then you sent your sheriff after her when she wouldn't open the door. Then you sent him after us when you realized someone had heard you. Whitaker leaned over the desk. That old woman is standing in the way of growth. No, Maya said. She is standing in the way of theft. His face hardened. You have no idea what it takes to run a town. I know what it takes to steal one. The words struck him harder than she expected. His pride had been built to deflect accusations of corruption, racism, even cruelty. But theft was too plain, too common, too close to the truth. From the hallway, an agent called. We found the returned mail log. Multiple federal complaint envelopes marked undelivered, stored in city records. Holt looked at Maya. Maya held Whitaker's gaze. The borders were closing. Whitaker sat down slowly, not because anyone told him to, but because his knees seemed to remember gravity at last. His voice changed. It became lower, rougher, stripped of performance. You think this town will thank you? Maya said nothing. They'll blame you, he continued. When projects stop, when checks stop, when roads don't get fixed, people don't care where money comes from, as long as it comes. Ruth stepped into the office. That's what every thief says when someone checks the register. Whitaker ignored her. His eyes stayed on Maya. You think you're justice? Maya looked at the shredded documents, the hidden cash, the boxes, the staffers shaking in the hallway, and beyond all of it, she thought of Mrs. Harris's porch lights glowing one by one down Carter Street. No, she said. I'm the part that arrives after justice has been ignored too long. For once, Harold Whitaker had no clever answer. Holt's radio crackled. Marshal team arriving at Magnolia Room. Dobbs located. Pike in custody. Maddox secured. Awaiting instruction on Whitaker. Maya looked at Holt. Holt gave one nod. Maya removed another folded document from the inside pocket of her jacket. This one was not the search warrant. Whitaker watched her open it. Only then did he understand. The office seemed to shrink around him. Harold Whitaker, Maya said, her voice clear in the room where he had signed away other people's homes. You are under arrest, pursuant to a federal warrant for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, deprivation of rights under color of law, bribery involving federal funds, and witness intimidation. Whitaker's hand gripped the edge of the desk. For a moment, he looked exactly as he had looked in the Magnolia Room, when Maya mentioned a federal judge, confused, offended, unable to believe the world had moved without asking his permission. Then he whispered, No. Maya stepped aside, as two agents moved toward him. Yes, she said. The law came through after all. Yes, Maya said. The law came through after all. For a second, Harold Whitaker did not move. He sat behind the mayor's desk with both hands gripping the polished edge, knuckles pale, eyes fixed on the federal warrant in Maya's hand, as if he could make the paper disappear by refusing to believe it. The office around him, the portraits, the flags, the framed awards, the photographs of ribbon cuttings and charity breakfasts, all of it seemed to lean inward and watch him become smaller. Two agents stepped closer. Whitaker suddenly stood. This is illegal. Special Agent Karen Holt did not blink. No, Mayor. What we are doing is signed, sealed, and witnessed. What you were doing is the reason we're here. You people think a piece of paper gives you the right to humiliate an elected official in his own office? Maya folded the warrant once, carefully. You had no problem humiliating people in restaurants, on porches, and at council meetings. His eyes snapped to her. This is personal for you. It became personal for a lot of families long before I arrived. One agent reached for Whitaker's arm. He jerked away. Don't touch me. The movement was sharp enough that every agent in the room shifted. Not dramatic, not panicked, just ready. Whitaker saw it, and some old instinct finally told him the room no longer belonged to him. Holt's voice hardened. Mayor Whitaker, Put your hands behind your back. He looked toward the doorway where his staffers stood frozen in the hall. Evan Price, the deputy clerk, stared at the floor. The woman in the cardigan had one hand over her mouth. No one came forward. No one said, "Call the sheriff." No one reached for a phone. Sheriff Maddox was already in cuffs at the motel, and everyone in that building seemed to understand that the old emergency number for Whitaker's power had stopped working. Whitaker's mouth twisted. "Evan." The deputy clerk looked up, terrified. "You saw this," Whitaker said. "You saw them force their way in." Evan's lips parted, but no words came out. Maya watched him. She knew that silence. It was not loyalty. It was a man calculating how much truth his fear could afford. Ruth stepped into the doorway, holding an evidence sleeve filled with documents. "Mr. Price, before you answer, you should know the rear parking lot is on camera. So is the service door. So is the box you were carrying." Evan's face crumpled. "He told me to move them," he whispered. "He said it was just old paperwork." Whitaker spun on him. "You ungrateful little coward." That was the moment the office changed completely. Not because Whitaker shouted. He had been shouting in one form or another for years. It changed because someone who had feared him heard the insult and did not shrink all the way down. Evan lifted his head. His voice shook, but it held. "You told me I'd lose my job if those files were still here by morning." Whitaker went red. "Shut your mouth." Holt nodded to one of her agents. "Get Mr. Price separated and take his statement." The woman in the cardigan began to cry softly. "He made us stay. He called after midnight and said, if we didn't come in, he'd remember it when budget cuts came." Whitaker pointed at her. "Marilyn, don't you dare." Maya looked at him then, not with anger, but with something colder and steadier. "That is what power became to you, didn't it? A way to make everyone afraid of your memory." For the first time, Whitaker's face faltered. The agents moved again. This time he did not pull away. His shoulders stiffened as his hands were drawn behind his back. The cuffs closed around his wrists with a clean metallic click that seemed too small for the size of what it meant. Outside the office, someone gasped. Whitaker stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, as if dignity could be rebuilt by posture alone. But his tie hung crooked. His sleeves were wrinkled. One strip of shredded paper clung to the bottom of his shoe. Maya saw it and thought of all the notices, complaints, deeds, and letters he had tried to turn into trash. Holt read him the formal language of arrest. Whitaker barely seemed to hear it. His eyes had drifted to the window behind his desk. From there, he could see the courthouse square, the dark street, the bronze statue, the roofline of the Magnolia Room in the distance. For years, that view had told him he owned Red Creek. Now, with his hands cuffed behind him, it only showed him how much of the town would wake up without asking his permission. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. Maya answered, "No, we're correcting one." They led him out of the office. The hallway had filled with agents, evidence techs, and frightened city staff. Bankers' boxes were being labeled. Computer towers were disconnected. Phones were bagged. File cabinets stood open under fluorescent lights. Ruth stood near a folding table that had become a temporary evidence station, reading labels in her clear, steady voice. Returned correspondence log. Southside acquisition notices. Code enforcement escalation list. Campaign donor ledger. Whitaker passed each item as if walking through pieces of himself laid out for examination. At the stairs, he stopped. Below, the lobby of City Hall glowed under harsh lights. Through the glass front doors, Maya could see several townspeople already gathering outside despite the hour. Word had traveled faster than the convoy. A few held phones. Some stood in bathrobes or work jackets pulled over pajamas. A pastor from the Baptist church stood near the flagpole. Mr. Ellis from the motel had arrived too, leaning on a cane, speaking quietly to a state trooper. And there, at the edge of the crowd, stood Sarah Monroe. She still wore her black restaurant vest. Her hair was loose now, her face pale in the blue flash of emergency lights. She looked up just as Whitaker reached the lobby. Their eyes met. For years, people like Sarah had looked away from him. This time she did not. Whitaker saw her and sneered, but the sneer had no strength left. "You," he muttered. You'll regret this. Maya stopped beside him. Threatening another witness while in federal custody is a poor habit, Mayor. A nearby agent made a note. Whitaker's mouth closed. Sarah heard it. Her chin trembled, but she did not step back. Maya walked ahead of Whitaker and pushed open the glass doors. Night air rushed in. The crowd outside fell silent. The image struck Red Creek harder than any speech could have. Harold Whitaker, the man whose signs still hung in diner windows, the man who had opened parades and closed deals, the man who had decided where people sat, whose mail moved, whose house stayed standing, was being led out of City Hall in handcuffs. No one clapped. No one cheered. Older people knew too well that justice was not entertainment. It was a heavy thing, long delayed, and when it finally arrived, it carried all the years it had been absent. Mrs. Lillian Harris was not there. Daniel would not have allowed it. But Maya imagined her porch light burning on Carter Street and hoped somehow the old woman could feel the shift in the air. Whitaker lifted his chin as they guided him down the steps. You people will beg me to come back when this town falls apart. A man in the crowd, gray-haired and wearing a mechanic's jacket, answered quietly, Town's been falling apart with you in it. Another voice, older and female, said, Let him go, not let him free. Let him go. As if Red Creek had been holding a poison in its lungs and was finally exhaling. Whitaker was placed in the back of a federal vehicle. When the door shut, the sound echoed across the square. Maya stood on the steps for a moment, watching the people watch the car. Ruth came beside her, carrying a sealed evidence bag. Her face was tired, but her eyes were bright. Daniel called. Ruth said softly, Mrs. Harris is safe. Carter Street is awake. Somebody told them. Maya nodded. Sarah approached slowly from the edge of the crowd. She held her arms around herself like she was cold, though the Georgia night was warm. Is it over? She asked. Maya looked from the federal vehicles to City Hall, to the boxes of evidence being carried out, to the people still afraid to speak too loudly. No, she said gently, but it has started. Sarah swallowed. I should have said more sooner. Ruth's voice softened. Baby, fear teaches silence one day at a time. Courage comes back the same way. Sarah looked at the vehicle holding Whitaker. He's really not coming back tonight? No, Maya said. Not tonight. The young waitress closed her eyes, and one tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it quickly, embarrassed. Maya did not tell her not to cry. Some tears were not weakness. Some were the body realizing it had survived. Special Agent Holt stepped out of City Hall and joined them. We're moving Whitaker to Atlanta for initial processing. Maddox will follow. Dobbs is being picked up at his house. Vernon Pike is already in custody. We still have hours of search ahead. Maya looked toward the Magnolia Room. Its windows were dark now, but she could still see the table by the window in her mind. The bourbon, the laughter, the $100 bill in her food. What about the private dining room? She asked. Team is there now, Holt said. They found residue from the cash bans, a locked cabinet, and a ledger behind a false panel. Looks like the restaurant was more than a meeting place. Sarah went pale. Mr. Hale? Holt's expression was measured. He's cooperating. Afraid, but cooperating. Maya was not surprised. Thomas Hale had spent years bending. Now that the weight had shifted, he would bend toward the side most likely to save him. A federal vehicle pulled away with Whitaker inside. As it passed the crowd, the mayor turned his face toward the window. For one brief second, his eyes found Maya's. The confusion was gone now. He knew exactly who she was. Not the woman he had moved. Not the woman he had mocked. Not the woman he had tried to buy with a $100 bill. The woman who had listened. The woman who had waited. The woman who had brought the warrant. The SUV disappeared down the road toward the highway. Maya looked up at the courthouse clock. It was 3:31 a.m. By sunrise, Red Creek would know. By noon, the phones would start ringing. By Monday, the council vote would not happen. And somewhere on Carter Street, Lillian Harris would still be in her house. Maya turned back toward City Hall as another box of records came through the doors. The night was not finished. The case was not over. But the king had left the building in cuffs. For a town that had forgotten what consequence looked like, That was enough for one morning. By 6 in the morning, Red Creek had stopped pretending it was asleep. Porch lights still burned on Carter Street. Pickup trucks idled along the courthouse square. The diner opened early, not because anyone wanted breakfast, but because people needed somewhere to sit while they repeated the same sentence in different ways. They took him out in handcuffs. The words moved from booth to booth, from coffee cup to coffee cup, from old men in seed caps to women in church cardigans to workers still wearing boots dusted with red clay. Some said it with relief. Some said it with disbelief. Some whispered it as if Harold Whitaker's name might still summon punishment through the walls. At the Magnolia Room, the front door was unlocked under federal supervision just after sunrise. Maya Williams stood near the host stand with Ruth Coleman beside her, both wearing gloves now, both no longer pretending to be customers. The dining room looked smaller in the morning light, without bourbon laughter, piano music, and the warm glow of lamps. It was just tables, chairs, polished wood, and a silence that had nowhere to hide. The table near the window was empty. So was the table near the restroom. But Maya could still see the night before as if it had stained the air. Whitaker's cane-striking tile, Sarah's trembling tray, Thomas Hale's pale face, the $100 bill landing in her food like an insult-made paper. Special Agent Holt's team had worked through the night. The private dining room in back had revealed more than anyone expected. A locked cabinet with envelopes marked by initials, a handwritten ledger taped beneath a drawer, copies of city contracts, a burner phone, and a list of names beside dollar amounts. Not all of it would be enough by itself. Evidence rarely arrived as a full confession tied in a ribbon. But together, with the audio, the mail logs, the code enforcement files, and Maddox's unlawful motel raid, it formed a shape too clear to dismiss. Thomas Hale sat at a table near the bar, both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he had not touched. He looked 10 years older than he had the night before. Sarah stood near the kitchen doors, arms folded tightly, watching federal technicians photograph the private dining room. Maya approached Thomas first. He looked up quickly. "Am I under arrest?" "Not right now." His shoulders sagged, but the relief did not last. Maya sat across from him. "Mr. Hale, that answer can change depending on what you decide to do next." Thomas swallowed. "I didn't take money." "No. You gave them a room to take it in." His eyes closed briefly. Ruth sat down beside Maya. "There's a difference between fear and innocence. The law understands fear. It does not excuse years of helping a man hurt people." Thomas stared into his coffee. "You don't know what it was like." "Then tell us," Maya said. For a long moment, he said nothing. The old habit was still there, holding his mouth shut like a hand. Then he looked toward Sarah, who was pretending not to listen but hearing every word. "The first time he asked me to move someone, it was a couple from Carter Street," Thomas said quietly. "Older couple. Anniversary dinner. They had saved for it. Mayor said he didn't want them near his donors. I thought if I made it smooth, it would be less humiliating." Maya's face did not move. Thomas let out a broken breath. "That's what I told myself, that I was making the cruelty softer. After a while, I stopped hearing how stupid that sounded." Ruth's voice was low. "Cruelty doesn't get softer because you fold a napkin over it." Thomas nodded. His eyes filled, but he blinked the tears back. He used this place because people talked here. Contractors, council members, Sheriff Maddox. Sometimes they went to the private room. Sometimes they didn't even bother. He liked people knowing he was untouchable. "Did you keep records?" Maya asked. Thomas looked ashamed. "Not on purpose." "Meaning?" "The reservation system. Private room bookings. Special instructions. Some nights I wrote notes in the manager log for staff. Initials. Times. Who needed bourbon waiting. Who wasn't supposed to be disturbed. I never thought of it as evidence." "Where is the manager log?" He pointed toward the office behind the bar. "Bottom drawer, blue binder." Ruth stood. "I'll get it." Thomas looked at Maya. Sarah tried to speak up more than once. I shut her down. Not because she was wrong, because I was scared of what being right would cost us. Maya leaned back slightly. "You owe her that apology more than you owe it to me." He nodded, but he did not look ready. Maya stood and walked toward Sarah. The young waitress straightened as she approached. "Are you all right?" Maya asked. Sarah gave a small, tired laugh. "I don't think I know what that means this morning." "That's honest." Sarah glanced toward Thomas. "Is he going to say, 'I helped you'?" "You did help us." Her face paled. Maya softened her tone. "Sarah, helping us was not a crime. But you may be asked to give a formal statement. You'll be protected as a witness." "My mother works at the clerk's office," Sarah said. "If people think I brought this down on the town." "Whitaker brought it down," Maya said. "Not you." Sarah looked at the window table. "He always made it feel like everybody else caused the problem. If you were poor, you embarrassed the town. If you were black, you made him uncomfortable. If you asked questions, you were stirring trouble. If you stayed quiet, he called that agreement." Maya nodded slowly. "That's how men like him survive. They make victims carry the weight of their own crimes." Sarah rubbed her hands together. "Last night, when you thanked me, I almost cried in the kitchen. Nobody ever thanked me for standing up before. Mostly they tell me to be careful. Both can be true," Maya said. "You were brave, and you need to be careful." Ruth emerged from the office holding a thick blue binder. "Found it." Thomas looked toward Sarah then. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Sarah," he said, voice rough. "I'm sorry." The dining room quieted around them, though only a few people were inside. Sarah stared at him. Thomas continued. "You were right. Both nights, and before that too. I should have backed you. I should have backed a lot of people." Sarah's eyes glistened, but she did not rescue him from the discomfort. "Yes, you should have." Thomas lowered his head. "I know. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was truth spoken in a room where truth had been treated like bad manners for too long." Maya's phone buzzed. She stepped aside and answered. "William," Daniel's voice came through. "Mrs. Harris wants to know if she's allowed to make breakfast for federal agents." Maya looked toward Ruth, who raised an eyebrow. "She's safe?" "Safe and stubborn. Half of Carter Street is on her porch. Somebody brought biscuits. Somebody else brought a local reporter." Maya closed her eyes briefly. "A reporter? Small paper out of Macon. Apparently Mrs. Harris called her niece, and her niece called everybody." Ruth muttered. "Good for the niece," Daniel continued. "People are talking, Maya. Not just about last night. About years. Fines, threats, lost mail, land offers, traffic stops. They're bringing boxes. Boxes. Receipts. Letters. Notices. One man has 20 years of city paperwork in a laundry basket." Maya looked through the restaurant window toward the waking square. For years, Whitaker had buried people one file at a time. Now the files were coming back. "Keep them organized," she said. "Names, addresses, contact information. No originals leave their owners without receipts." "You got it." "And Maya?" "Yes? You need to come see this." The line clicked off. Within 20 minutes, Maya, Ruth, and Special Agent Holt drove toward Carter Street. They passed City Hall, where agents still carried boxes down the steps. They passed the diner, where faces turned toward their vehicle. They passed the bronze statue in the square, its raised hand catching the morning sun as if pointing at a future it had no right to claim alone. Carter Street came into view slowly. It was full of people, not a crowd like a riot. A crowd like a church supper, a funeral, a family reunion, a neighborhood finally remembering itself. Elderly women sat in porch chairs with folders on their laps. Men leaned against pickup trucks holding envelopes. Younger people recorded interviews on phones. Children ran between yards until their grandmothers called them back. At the center of it all, Lillian Harris stood on her porch in a blue house dress, serving coffee from a silver pot like she had been expecting justice for breakfast. Daniel met Maya at the curb. "Told you?" Mrs. Harris saw Maya and lifted one hand. "There she is." The street turned. Dozens of eyes found Maya. Some suspicious, some hopeful, some tired beyond either. An older man stepped forward with a shoebox in his hands. "My name is Earl Johnson," he said. "They took my brother's house." A woman beside him lifted a folder. "They fined my church for feeding people without a permit. Another voice called. Sheriff Maddox impounded my son's car after he signed a complaint. One by one, the stories came forward. Maya did not interrupt. She did not promise what she could not control. She listened, because listening was the first repair in a place where people had been told their words never left town. Ruth began organizing names. Holt called for additional agents. Daniel kept watch from the sidewalk, but even he looked moved by the sight of Carter Street, refusing to whisper. Mrs. Harris stepped down from the porch and came to Maya's side. "Looks like it broke loud after all," she said. Maya looked at the people gathered beneath porch lights, now unnecessary in the full morning sun. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "It did." Mrs. Harris nodded toward City Hall in the distance. "Question is, what happens after the noise?" Maya watched a little girl carry a stack of envelopes almost too big for her arms. "Then we make sure the truth has somewhere to go," she said. And for the first time since Maya arrived in Red Creek, the town did not feel like Whitaker's kingdom. It felt like evidence. It felt like memory. It felt like people standing where they had always belonged. For a long time, after the federal vehicles left Carter Street, people stayed where they were. No one seemed ready to go back inside. Not yet. They stood in yards, on sidewalks, beneath the wounded pecan tree, holding copies of receipts and city notices, as if those papers had become proof they had not imagined their own suffering. The truck had been towed away. The broken trash can was upright again. Children were picking small scraps of paper from the grass and handing them to Ruth Coleman, like offerings at a church altar. Mrs. Lillian Harris sat on her porch with one hand resting on her cane and the other on the trunk of the pecan tree. The bark was split where the truck had struck it, but the branches still reached over the street, green leaves trembling in the warm Georgia air. Maya Williams stood beside her. "You should let someone look at that tree," Maya said. Mrs. Harris kept her eyes on the branches. "I will, but not today." "No, today it can stand there and make its point." Maya smiled softly. "Yes, ma'am." Daniel Brooks came up the steps, tired and dusty, a thin line of dried blood still visible across one knuckle from the night before. "Last evidence vehicle is gone. Holt says Patricia Whitaker's statement matches the ledger. The assistant is already asking for a lawyer and blaming the mayor." Mrs. Harris gave a dry little laugh. "Rats always hear the ship sinking before the captain does." Ruth, carrying a stack of signed receipt forms, climbed the porch behind him. Captain heard it too. He just thought he owned the ocean. For the first time since the case began, Daniel laughed for real. It was not loud, but it loosened something in the air. Maya looked down Carter Street. People were still talking, but the sound was different now. Not fearful whispering, not panicked murmuring. It was the sound of neighbors comparing stories, correcting dates, remembering names, building one truth out of many pieces. A woman from 3 houses down waved to Mrs. Harris. "Lillian, we're bringing supper over tonight. Don't argue." Mrs. Harris called back. "I wasn't planning to cook after all this federal excitement." The woman smiled. "Good, because your meatloaf is dry." Mrs. Harris gasped. "Now that is witness intimidation." Even Maya laughed. That evening, as the sun lowered behind Red Creek, Maya, Daniel, and Ruth returned to the Magnolia Room one last time before leaving town. Not for evidence, not for an arrest, not because Whitaker had made it important, because sometimes a place had to be entered again after fear had left it. The restaurant looked different with its front windows open and the lights softer. Federal tape had been removed from the dining room, though the private room remained sealed. The table by the window was empty. The table near the restroom had been cleared and reset with fresh linen, as if the room itself was trying to cover its shame. Sarah Monroe met them at the host stand. Her hair was tied back, but her eyes were no longer lowered. She wore the same black vest, the same name tag, but something about her posture had changed. "Good evening," she said. Then she stopped, embarrassed by the ordinary phrase. "Sorry, habit," Maya answered. "Good evening, Sarah." Thomas Hale stood behind her, hands folded in front of him. He looked frightened, but not the way he had looked when Whitaker owned the room. This fear was different. It was the fear of a man who knew he had to live with himself. "I saved the window table," Thomas said quietly. If you want it. Daniel glanced at Maya. Ruth lifted an eyebrow. Maya looked across the dining room toward the table where Harold Whitaker had sat like a king, where he had laughed about Carter Street, where he had believed power meant deciding who deserved to be seen. Then, she looked at the smaller table near the restroom. No, Maya said. Thomas blinked. No? Maya walked toward the table near the restroom and touched the back of one chair. We'll sit here. Sarah's eyes widened. Are you sure? Yes. Ruth understood first. She smiled and sat down. Daniel followed, shaking his head with quiet admiration. Thomas looked confused. But that's the table he forced you to take. Maya pulled out her chair. Then, let's change what it means. No one argued. Sarah brought them iced tea, cornbread, fried green tomatoes, and 3 plates of shrimp and grits, because Ruth said she had unfinished business with the menu, and Daniel claimed any case that ended without dessert was poorly managed. The restaurant was not full, but a few townspeople came in as the evening went on. A pastor and his wife, Mr. Ellis from the motel, 2 women from Carter Street, a retired mechanic who had brought his own envelope that morning and now sat near the window, eating slowly as if testing whether the room would allow peace. Thomas moved from table to table with a humility that was not yet redemption but might become the beginning of it. When Sarah passed him, he said please and thank you like he was relearning words he should never have misplaced. Near the end of the meal, Sarah brought a slice of pecan pie with 3 forks. On the house, she said. Then, after a pause, this time I mean from me. Ruth picked up a fork. Baby, that is the best kind of government cooperation. Sarah laughed, and the sound was young, relieved, and almost startled by itself. Maya looked around the room. The private dining room door was locked. Whitaker's bourbon glass was gone. His chair near the window sat empty under the evening light. Outside, the courthouse square glowed gold, but it no longer seemed untouchable. Daniel leaned back. Another case closed. Ruth glanced at Maya. He's been waiting all day to say that. I earned it, Daniel said. Maya smiled faintly. No, not closed. Daniel gave an exaggerated sigh. I walked into that. Ruth's eyes softened. Corrected? Maya looked toward the restroom hallway, then toward the window, then toward Sarah standing at the host stand with her chin a little higher than before. Started, Maya said. Correction takes longer than arrest. Silence settled for a moment, not heavy this time, but thoughtful. The next morning, Maya drove back through Carter Street before leaving Red Creek. Daniel and Ruth were quiet in the car. Mrs. Harris was on her porch, as Maya somehow knew she would be. The old woman lifted one hand as the Taurus slowed. Maya rolled down the window. You leaving? Mrs. Harris asked. For now. Mrs. Harris came down the steps slowly. The pecan tree stood behind her, wounded but alive. You tell that judge I'll come testify, she said. And if Harold Whitaker looks at me sideways, I'll bring my skillet. Daniel muttered. I believe her. Maya nodded. So do I. Mrs. Harris reached through the window and placed something in Maya's hand. It was a small photograph, old and slightly faded. Carter Street in summer. Children on bicycles, men standing beside cars, women on porches. A younger Lillian Harris smiling beside Earl under the pecan tree. I made a copy, Mrs. Harris said. Keep that one. Remind yourself what all those papers were really about. Maya looked at the photograph, and for a moment she did not speak. Evidence could prove a crime, but memory proved what the crime had cost. Thank you, Maya said. Mrs. Harris leaned closer. And next time somebody moves you to a bad table, you sit there like you own the building. Maya smiled. Yes, Mom. As they drove out of town, Red Creek looked the same in many ways. The courthouse still stood. The diner still served coffee. The statue still raised its bronze hand over the square. But the campaign posters in the windows were coming down. At City Hall, federal notices covered the front door. On Carter Street, people were outside. That was the change Maya trusted most. Not headlines, not handcuffs. People outside. Daniel glanced at the rearview mirror. Think it holds? Ruth answered before Maya could. Truth is like a porch light. Once one comes on, folks remember where the switch is. Maya held Mrs. Harris's photograph in her lap as Red Creek disappeared behind them. She thought of Whitaker's cane-striking marble, the $100 bill in her plate, Maddox's gun lowered in the motel shadows, Sarah's trembling voice, Thomas's apology, Patricia Whitaker's stained cream suit, Mrs. Harris touching the wounded pecan tree and saying, "Still standing. No case repaired everything. No warrant erased every humiliation. No arrest gave back every home. Every year, every night people had spent afraid of a knock at the door." But justice did not always arrive as a perfect ending. Sometimes it arrived as a beginning with paperwork, witnesses, porch lights, and one woman calm enough to listen, while a powerful man buried himself with his own words. Maya looked out at the highway opening ahead. Behind her, a town was breathing again. Ahead, there would be another file, another room, another man who mistook quiet for weakness. When that day came, Maya William would walk in wearing something simple, carrying a plain purse, letting him believe whatever made him careless. And when the time was right, she would open that purse and show him the law had been sitting beside him all along. The lesson of this story is that true power does not come from status, money, or a title. It comes from character, patience, and the courage to stand for what is right even when the room is against you. Maya William teaches us that silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is wisdom waiting for the right moment. Harold Whitaker believed he could use fear, racism, and authority to control an entire town. But in the end, his own arrogance exposed him. The story reminds us that justice may arrive quietly, but when it comes with truth, witnesses, and courage, even the most powerful bully can be brought down. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If it touched your heart, I would truly love to hear your thoughts on the storytelling, the emotional pacing, or whatever stayed with you after listening. Every comment you share helps make the next stories more honest, moving, and meaningful. And if you have a powerful or meaningful story of your own, please do not hesitate to send it to the channel. It may become the next story to touch and inspire thousands of others. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.